Hello, everyone. I am the true scary storyteller, and I am here to help you today. I know you are using this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from, and what time are you watching right now? Get comfortable and relax. Colt was only 13 years old when he rode as fast as he could away from Benji and Caleb, the most menacing boys in Troop 0172. It was the dead of night, and only the faint orange moonlight lit the narrow path for Colt's tiny canoe, which, starting to overflow. Benji and Caleb, whose kayak was much bigger and whose rowing skills were far superior, were gaining on him, shouting from less than 50 away. "Give up, F-Ogget!" Benji hollered, his ugly words bouncing off the tide. "Just give up!" Caleb followed, his voice slightly straining. When Colt was sure he reached the center of Gardner Lake, he stopped rowing and let go of his oars, raising both hands in the air. The kayak approached, practically bumping the canoe, and the boys laughed maniacally. Clad in camo shorts, Benji tossed a can of Miller Lite at Colt, which he dodged easily. Caleb bit his lip as Colt crossed his arms, waiting for whatever the boys had in store. "I should kill you right here." Benji spat into the water, clenching his fists. "I will slice you like the fruit you are." Colt sighed as Benji drew a pocket knife from his shorts. He was ready for this confrontation, even though he had no idea how to fight. Since last summer, Colt had been running from the rumors, running from all the ugly words about him being different and better. Off dead. He was done running from the truth. "So do it," Colt said coldly. "Slice me like the fruit I am. The thing is, you'll have to slice Caleb after you're done with me." "Colt, don't," Caleb uttered, his lost blue eyes locked helplessly on his. Before they could move, they heard a sound from underneath the water, an odd sound that stopped them in their tracks. It sounded like music from a piano, an old piano like the one that sat in his grandparents' living room. The notes, Siu, sounded tinny and creaky, like they belonged in an old saloon. "What the hell is that?" Benji snapped as the notes grew increasingly louder. "It sounds like Swanee River," Caleb murmured. As Benji shot him a wide-eyed glance mouthing the words, "What the fuck?" he quickly corrected himself. "Or something. I don't know." The tinny, creaky notes grew increasingly louder. The waves collapsed within themselves like water at the edge of a fall, cascading down into a dark abyss. They desperately tried to paddle backward, but the violent current sucked them down into the abyss. Colt couldn't scream, as his lungs started to fill with water. He held his breath, attempting to swim to the surface, but the downward current proved much too strong. Benji and Caleb must have sunk far beneath him, as he could only see the lake's murky water from all directions. Just when Colt thought he couldn't sink any deeper, his body smacked something hollow. For a moment, everything went dark. When Colt opened his eyes, he found his body strewn out on an oak staircase, water rapidly entering his airways. He willed himself to hold his breath for just a little bit longer, as pieces of a brick or cavity wall penetrated the stairs above him. How long could he realistically hold his breath? Last summer, his older sister Nikki timed him for 2 minutes and complimented his lung capacity. Or maybe it was 90 seconds. He wasn't sure and wasn't about to find out. Colt mustered the strength to propel his body upward. His entire body ached as he squeezed his arms behind his ears and pointed his feet together, kicking them like a dolphin's fin. Years later, he would be grateful for being the only kid in his friend group to make it to advanced-level swim lessons. As Colt began to kick, he saw a shadow looming on the cavity wall, slowly creeping into focus. Out of the corner of his eye, he thought he saw a young boy floating in the entryway. He could only discern the boy's blonde hair and short stature. Turning his head, he realized the image of the boy belonged to a large portrait, decaying on the wall of the house. Something was wrong, though, terribly wrong. As Colt propelled his body toward the surface, the cavity walls still surrounded him. The oak staircase stretched longer than it first appeared, now winding into the depths of the waters. The walls were lined with black and white portraits of men, women, and children. The portraits numbered in the dozens, several dozen even. Their faces were warped and pixelated. Some of their faces were devoid of expression altogether. Colt knew he was inside an old colonial house, but why was it underneath the water? Why did it seem so massive? Before he could comprehend these questions, the never-ending wall of portraits sank rapidly beneath him along with the winding staircase. He grew dizzy watching the walls zoom past him and the stairs twist into a dark oblivion. He couldn't help but notice the faces in those. Warped and pixelated portraits were now visible but looked like decomposing corpses. Illuminated the lake. He would often sneak out to the docks when the boys told campfire stories or played pranks on each other. On any other night, he would have felt at peace. Tonight, he couldn't help waiting in nervous anticipation for the eerie piano music to nauseous and losing consciousness. Colt swam as rapidly as he could to the surface. Only mere seconds passed before he popped his head above the water, taking long, gasping breaths. He heard voices, but the voices were muffled as he struggled to breathe normally. Something was wrong again. Benji and Caleb were back in their kayaks and looked completely dry. There was another boat next to theirs, Scoutmaster Jeff's black and white motorized fishing boat. From their boats, the three of them stared at Colt, not in a menacing way, but with looks of genuine concern. Scoutmaster Jeff extended his long, hairy arm and pulled Colt into the boat. There was something about the Scoutmaster's smile that felt off to Colt, especially at this moment when his look of concern changed to a warm glance with a sparkly white smile. Everyone else was charmed by this blonde-haired, blue-eyed man of God, but he saw it for what it was. My goodness. "Colt!" Scoutmaster Jeff exclaimed, throwing a towel around him and helping him onto the vinyl passenger bench. "We were so worried about you." "What?" "Yeah, man," Benji said, still with suspiciously watery eyes. "When you came out here on your own, we were so worried." "Wait, what? You guys chased me out here?" Colt struggled to find his wording as they stared at him. Caleb and Benji climbed from their boat to the Scoutmasters and put an arm around Colt's shoulder, forcing a seat next to him. "What the hell? Don't touch me." "That's no way to talk to friends." Scoutmaster Jeff shook his head and sighed. "I know that you've been through a lot, but these boys saved your life." "What were you doing out here?" "They were chasing me," he said, even softer. "And you guys were with me. We were all sinking. How was your boat? How are you still drunk?" "Whoa, whoa," Caleb said, throwing his hands up. "The only reason it looked like we were chasing you is because you took off in the middle of the night." "Yeah, dude," Benji chimed in. "By the time we got here, you dove into the water." "It's a good thing they came back and told me," the Scoutmaster said, placing a third unwanted hand on him. "You were out here for a long time. We split up to search for you. What were you looking for?" "What the actual fuck?" Colt mumbled. "You guys were drowning with me, and then you were gone. I was in this old house and—" The threesome stared at him with deep puzzlement. Colt wanted to shout or throw punches at them, but something held him back. He knew it wouldn't be any good. Scoutmaster Jeff laughed heartily. "Okay, I think I know why you came out here. Benji, Caleb, I'm not sure if you know this legend, but Colt can tell you about the sinking house." "The what?" "Don't be modest now. Colt, you're a real history buff like me. See, boys, sometime in the late 1800s, a family tried to push their house across the lake when it froze over during the winter. It sounds crazy, but they thought they could do it and had the townspeople help push the house on skis. It was a monumental task, of course, so the family and town took a day's break. The next day, the house started sinking." "What?" Colt said again in absolute bewilderment. "I guess that makes sense now. I mean, I saw the staircase and portraits and—" Colt's words faded into another hearty laugh from the Scoutmaster. "You have an active imagination. The house sank over 100 years ago. Even when I was a boy, divers had taken most of the valuables from the house. You wouldn't have seen any portraits." "What?" "But I did, and I heard piano music." This time, all three of them laughed heartily. Scoutmaster Jeff patted his back once more, which caused Colt to squirm. "Looks like someone's bought this particular legend hook, line, and sinker." As the threesome droned on about the odd legend, Colt heard the tinny, creaky notes from beneath the waves. Colt shivered, and Caleb bit his lip. They exchanged glances for a quick second. Colt furrowed his brow, which caused Caleb to gulp before turning back to the scoutmaster. After the conversation ended, Colt and Benji climbed back into their boat, which the scoutmaster had tethered by rope to his. He tethered Colt's too, which had a small hole in the stern. For the first few minutes as the boats glided across the waves, the lake sounded peaceful. When they neared the shore, however, the notes of Swanee River played again, this time increasing in volume. The scoutmaster and Benji were blissfully unaware of that awful song. Then again, maybe they were being purposely deceptive. He was too tired to tell, but knew that Caleb heard the notes when he caught sight of his trembling lower lip. After they reached the shore, Scoutmaster Jeff and the boys moored their boats to the wooden dock and attempted to lure Colt back to the campground. Colt insisted he needed some time alone. Reluctantly, they headed back to the site, which was still lively with activity. Colt stayed on the dock, admiring the orange moonlight and the way it returned. Tonight, he couldn't help waiting for Benji and Caleb to get him when he least expected it. On the other hand, they might just keep up the charade of claiming Colt dreamt of being chased, just like he dreamt of the sinking house. "Hey, bud." Colt groaned as he heard his tent mate Jordan step onto the dock. "Are you coming back to camp soon?" Colt shook his head. "No, Jordan, just leave me alone." "Whoa, I just came out here to see how you're doing." Colt turned around, groaning more audibly as he saw the only scout considered weirder than him, dressed in an oversized X-Files t-shirt and torn sweatpants decked in little alien heads. "We both know why you're out here. You heard them talk about the sinking house and how crazy I am." "I don't think you're crazy." "Of course you don't." Colt sighed and took a seat on the edge of the dock. "No offense, Jordan, but you're the last person I want to talk to about this right now." "It's not like you have anyone else to talk to," Jordan replied, taking a seat next to him. "Why were you out here anyway?" Colt composed himself. With a single deep breath. "You can't tell anyone, Jordan, I mean it." He nodded. "Benji saw Caleb and me walking together the other night. Caleb got nervous and told Benji I was stalking him, which is not true. Anyway, they chased me, and I took a kayak to get away from them. That wasn't a good idea because they're better kayakers than I am. And then," Colt looked up to see if Jordan was still listening, which he truly appreciated. The other scouts would have made fun of his lisp by now or told Colt he deserved idiot, and then we heard this weird piano music and started drowning. I know it sounds crazy, but it was like we were sucked down a vacuum or portal or something. I ended up in this sunken house. It had a staircase and creepy portraits. I know it sounds unbelievable, but "You found the sunken house of Gardner Lake?" Jordan exclaimed. "You would know the legend." "I do. I can't believe you found it." "Holy shit, dude." Colt smiled faintly as Jordan went on about how he researched the house on this website called the Shadowlands and always wanted to find the house. "Well, they don't believe me either." "Then they're full of it. Everyone knows about the legend, and if they deny it, they're lying to themselves." "I guess so." "All right," Jordan said, sighing and looking over his shoulder. "I'll tell you something too if you promise not to tell anyone." "Okay." "Last night I saw a scout I didn't recognize. He was standing on the docks, where we are now. He wore this old-school scout uniform, a khaki green shirt and pants like my dad had in the 70s. He said his name was, well, I forgot what it was exactly, but he was looking for our scoutmaster. I woke up the scoutmaster to find him. By the time we got there, he disappeared. You're saying you saw a ghost? All I know is there's a lot of strange stuff out here." "How did he react?" Colt laughed as Jordan made his best impression of Scoutmaster Jeff, bulging his muscles. "Listen to me, Geordie boy. I am your scoutmaster. You must be a manly man like me and not believe in any ghost stories." He doesn't sound like Arnold Schwarzenegger. He might as well with his fake macho attitude. The boys joked and made impressions of Scoutmaster Jeff and the other campers until they drifted off to sleep. Colt had fallen asleep on the dock before, but tonight was different. Jordan knew he was weird and didn't care. Colt envied Jordan's carefree attitude and lack of humility. The dull sounds of crickets and waves lulled them to a deep slumber. A few hours before sunrise, Colt heard the tinny, creaky notes from beneath the waves again. The notes no longer resembled Swanee River, but a much older song, one he didn't recognize. It sounded classical, like Beethoven or Bach. Those were the only names Colt could recall from the short summer he took piano lessons. "Jordan, wake up!" Colt nudged him a few times until he gasped. "Jesus, dude, what is it? Do you hear that?" Jordan stretched his arms and then all of a sudden sprang to his feet. "Holy shit, dude, where is that piano music coming from? You can hear it?" "Of course I can. Hey, Scoutmaster Jeff's boat is gone." With each passing note, the boys paced back and forth on the dock, wondering what to do. Colt checked the time. 3 a.m. Why would the Scoutmaster take his boat out this early? Where were the notes coming from, and why were they so loud and unnerving? He had only a moment to contemplate these questions before his thoughts were interrupted by muffled screams. "Who the hell is that? Who's out?" Colt clasped Jordan's mouth as the muffled screams continued. The screams conjoined with the tinny, creaky notes paralyzed them in fear. Jordan gestured for Colt to jump into the kayak. Unwittingly, Colt followed. As they paddled deeper into the lake, they could no longer make out the screams or notes. Only the faint sound of the tide, and a gust of wind remained. Oh my God. Colt could barely believe his eyes as he saw Scoutmaster Jeff's black and white motorized fishing boat several yards away from them. Though the boat was eclipsed by darkness, he could make out the silhouette of Scoutmaster Jeff and another, smaller figure. "Is that who I—" Colt nodded slowly. Before they could say anything more, the boat sped off into the distance. Colt and Jordan were stunned. For the rest of their stay at Gardner Lake, the boys barely spoke to each other. But as the months passed, Colt knew something about Scoutmaster Jeff was off, and something awful happened in the middle of Gardner Lake, and it wasn't the piano or house. When he tried to convince Jordan that they should tell someone, he insisted that all the boys were accounted for, and that they had no proof. The boy who needed no proof to believe in aliens, Bigfoot, and even the chupacabra, suddenly decided to be reasonable about this one moment in time. When the months turned into years, Colt stopped going to Scouts while Jordan stayed. He wanted nothing more to do with Troop 0172. He didn't want to be friends with someone who only acted eccentric and outspoken when it suited his interests. Several years after Colt graduated from college, he could hardly believe that Sasha, one of his best friends, started dating Jordan. Sasha was an intelligent girl, working on her master's degree in biology. Jordan, unsurprisingly, dropped out of the Connecticut School of Broadcasting to become a professional YouTuber. Needless to say, his endeavors weren't successful. Colt and Jade, his other best friend, lived in a small house on the outskirts of Winsted. To his chagrin, Sasha and Jordan often stopped by the house together. Colt tried to make himself scarce when he was around. On one dreary December afternoon, he found this impossible to do. "Colt, come here," Jade called from the living room. He was napping late into the afternoon and awoke disoriented as she called a second time. "Colt, get up. We're going to be late." Jade, Sasha, and Jordan playfully snickered as he wandered into the room. He stared blankly at them for a few moments, Sasha and Jade in their long-sleeve satin dresses, and Jordan dressed head to toe in a taupe suit with a wool jacket. Jade and Sasha fidgeted with their purses while Jordan adjusted his cufflinks. "You seriously forgot?" Sasha giggled. Jordan played with her hair until she smacked his hand away. "Hun, we're going to Samantha's wedding today." "You were sleeping all day," Jade said. "You were talking really loudly in your sigh. Sleep and said you never knew why." "I don't remember that, and isn't she more of your friend, Sash?" "Yes, but—" "And Jade, weren't you going with Miguel?" She shook her head. "He canceled at the last minute. He wasn't feeling well, so now you're my +1. "You're kidding." "I don't blame him. He's been through a lot these past few months. So have you." "Sorry, I didn't mean to," she sighed. "Don't worry about it. And I have, but I'm ready to get my mind off things. It will be fun. I hope." "Where is it?" Colt asked, rubbing his eyes. "It's at the Viridian." Sasha perked up as she said the name. It's a really adorable, rustic venue on Gardner Lake. Colt and Jordan exchanged wide-eyed glances, chomping their lips. The girls didn't seem to notice as they gushed about the charm of the venue. Jordan missed several hints from Sasha as he checked something on his phone. "Wait," Jordan spoke hushedly, his eyes still locked on his screen. "Is this the same Samantha who was just engaged to a different guy last year?" It was a few years ago, Jordan. Sasha groaned and nudged him. "She's been with this nice guy named Caleb for the past couple of years." Colt and Jordan exchanged the same glances, even more wide-eyed this time. "Saunders?" Colt uttered. "Caleb. Saunders? How did you know?" They said in almost unison. "We went to Boy Scouts with him." Jordan looked up from his screen and exhaled deeply. "He's kind of an asshole." "Jordan, no. Jordan's right. He and his best friend Benji used to pick on us when we were little." "That sucks, hun," Jade said, slinging an arm around his shoulder. "Kids are the absolute worst, but it's been like what, 15 years? Almost. People change. Let's go, guys." Sasha tugged Jordan toward the door. "What's wrong, Colt?" "Nothing." "You sure? I've got to get changed into something nicer and we'll go. Give me like 3 minutes, guys." They laughed as if they had forgotten about Colt in his t-shirt and sweatpants. In his bedroom, Colt discovered the wedding invitation Jade dropped on his bureau. Caleb looked the same, only somehow blonder and more unhappy than he remembered him, as he stoically held a gleaming Samantha in front of a rose garden. The last time Colt saw him happy, they were 12, and holding each other in Caleb's bedroom, genuinely enjoying each other's company. Caleb's father hosted scout meetings, which often led to the boys sneaking off while the other parents and kids engaged in some menial activity. The boys had been best friends since elementary school and even took piano lessons together. Swanee. River was one of the first songs they learned on the piano. The closer they grew, the angrier his father became. He never found out anything they did, but his suspicions were enough for him to send Caleb on some kind of religious summer retreat with Scoutmaster Jeff and a few other scouts from his camp. By the time Colt inquired about the trip, Caleb had already left. When Caleb returned, he barely acknowledged Colt's existence other than to mock him and Jordan with Benji. Colt traced his fingers over Caleb's stoic face before heading out into the bitter winter evening. "It's a little less than an hour and a half from here," Jordan said as he started his clunky Chevrolet. Colt and Jade squeezed into the back seat around boxes of clutter and discarded cans of soda. "Excuse the mess, guys." "Don't worry about it," Jade said, swatting some cans onto the floor. After a while, Jade noticed how unusually quiet the guys were. "This guy must have been awful to you, huh?" "Jade," Sasha exclaimed as Jordan nodded straight forward. "I thought we said that people change." "You said that." Jordan was still unusually quiet. "People like Caleb and Benji don't change. They made our lives miserable every chance they got." Sasha sighed. "Really? I'm sorry, guys. He seemed so nice when I met him and Sam for brunch a few months ago. What did he do?" "They chased me," Colt said softly. "They chased me by boat into the middle of Gardner Lake, saying they were going to kill me." "Tell them the other part," Jordan said hoarsely. "They won't believe me. They won't believe me. They'll believe you." "Colt?" He stared blankly out the window before his name was said a few more times. "Yeah, sorry. It's hard to think about. They said they were going to slice me like the fruit I am, and we were pulled under by this weird rip current. I sank deep into the water and saw this house." "Sorry," Jordan chimed in, perking up a bit. "Sometime in the 1800s, these people tried to push a house across the lake when it froze over in the winter. The house sank. Some say it was haunted. We even heard piano music coming from the lake." "Thank you, Jordan." Okay, sorry. I lost my train of thought. Anyway, the house was really old and had these strange photographs. When I came to the surface, I saw my scoutmaster with Benji and Caleb. The two denied they ever chased me. They denied being pulled underwater. The whole thing was weird. The rest of the summer, they taunted us mercilessly. Jordan said, clenching a fist. They taunted Colt for seeing the house and us for hearing the music on the lake. They accused Colt and me of being together and spray-painted effig outside of our tent. I kicked both of their asses for that. I don't remember that, Colt said faintly. Beyond the morning, they spotted the Scoutmaster's boat. The remainder of the summer was a blur. Perhaps he was so angry at Jordan for not wanting to say anything that he forgot the rest. I quit scouting shortly after, but Jordan's right. They didn't change. They were assholes in high school too. I couldn't be out because of guys like them. Luckily, only they thought they were cool, Jordan said. Being a scout in high school isn't the popular thing to do. Trust me, I would know. I wouldn't be surprised if that asshole Benji is the best man. He is. Sasha was surfing her phone, thumbs shaking. Benji's the best man, and who did you say the name of your scoutmaster was? I didn't. Jordan turned onto the interstate highway, struggling to keep his old Chevrolet steady in the wintry mix. Scoutmaster Jeff. He was a well-liked religious do-gooder, but I saw straight through it. He's the officiating pastor, Sasha uttered. Ugh, I'm sorry, guys. I totally didn't know. We can leave as soon as it's over. That's probably for the best, Jade stated firmly. I had no idea when I met him either. Yeah. Colt kept his eyes fixed on the road. We can use travel or something as an excuse. Well, wait a minute, Jordan said. Maybe I could capture some footage of the lake for my YouTube channel. Don't even, Jordan. Sasha put a hand on his leg. I thought you were giving that up. Jordan ignored that remark and fidgeted with the dials on the radio. I'm sick of listening to my playlist. So are we, Jade laughed. There's only so much rockabilly we can take. That's weird. I only seem to be getting one channel out here. 96.1. Hey, it's playing this old-timey music, really old-timey music. The three of them simultaneously groaned as Jordan turned up the volume and snapped his fingers to the tune of the ragtime piano music. The channel was a bit static-filled, so he turned the dial a bit more carefully. For the next half hour, he annoyed them with this station and imitated a ragtime performer with a transatlantic accent. They pretended to ignore Jordan by being on their phones or talking over the music. When Sasha was sick of pretending, she shouted for him to shut the hell up. This bit went on until tinny, creaky notes from an old piano blasted through the car's speakers. What is this crap? Can we change this? Jade nudged the back of Jordan's seat. I think I recognize this from an old movie, Sasha remarked. It's still awful, though. That's Swanee River, Colt murmured. Those awful notes were unmistakable. It wasn't the upbeat version he learned in piano lessons, but the slow, droning one he heard on Gardner Lake all those years ago. Typically, when he heard an audio version of the song, an old-fashioned crooner accompanied those notes with additional instrumentals. This version sounded like it was produced in a saloon or from the grand piano in his late grandparents' dining room. The four of them stayed silent as the song's volume and droning melody increased. That's the same song we heard on the fall lake that day. Jordan quickly switched the radio back to Bluetooth mode and sighed with relief as a song from his rockabilly playlist came on. We're not far out, guys. Let's just talk. Serves you right, Sasha said, slapping his knee. Jordan and Colt's stoic expressions caused Sasha to instantly regret her actions. I don't know what's going on with you guys, but I don't know how to help. What happened to you was messed up, and I'm sorry. All I can say is, if we stick together tonight, maybe it won't be as bad. The three of them agreed to this. Packed. The closer Jordan drove to the rustic lakeside venue, the louder the song's notes rattled through Colt's mind. Even after they parked in the snow-sprinkled lot and stepped out into the frigid night, he could only hear the notes playing on repeat. He wasn't sure if the notes were in his head or from the distant lake. Burrowing his hands in his jacket, Jordan seemed unbothered and unable to hear the notes. He and Sasha linked arms and scurried past some guests to the main entrance. Jade grabbed Colt's arm, which somehow caused the music to cease entirely. You'll be okay, and if it sucks, you have plenty of relatives who can die. Colt chuckled. We're not in college anymore. My old Aunt Lucy can't die and get us out of a history test again. Why not? If it sucks, Your favorite aunt can have a heart attack or something. Jade and Colt joked about this and other college shenanigans as they made their way inside the lobby for cocktail hour. They marveled at the massive, tinseled Christmas tree that scraped the wooden beams. Jade remarked how lovely the stone-accented walls were, along with the linen-covered cocktail tables. When Jordan and Sasha sauntered over, the girls split off to socialize with Samantha's friends, leaving the guys to scan the room for any familiar faces. Cranberry and goat cheese baguettes? A tuxedoed waiter asked at their side. Colt shook his head while Jordan grabbed a fistful from the tray. That's Bugie. Swallow. Sorry, that's Benji by the tree. He's talking to... Oh man, that's Scoutmaster Jeff. Benji wore the same blue-streaked, spiky hair people knew him for in high school, while the Scoutmaster looked just as smug and well-dressed as Colt remembered him, sporting a crew cut and navy suit. Colt and Jordan watched the men reminisce with former scouts and clink glasses together. Something about their happiness made Colt nauseous. Maybe it was Benji's pompous laugh or the way the Scoutmaster touched all the men tenderly as he spoke. It's like they don't remember. Or don't want to. Jordan, don't you remember the morning we went on the kayak? You know, the same morning we heard screams from his boat? Jordan nodded. Why didn't you say anything? I don't know. Maybe I was too scared. Who knows how many? Sorry. Colt willed himself to stop, exhaling deeply. The bulbs from the Christmas tree started to flicker. They flickered, bulb by bulb, first in columns, then circling the tree the way a snake circles and encloses its prey. Colt grabbed Jordan's arm as the bulbs started to burst. No other soul seemed to notice as glass burst onto the floor. Benji and the Scoutmaster laughed heartily with the others, unbothered by the glass raining upon their heads. They couldn't scream. They couldn't move. Colt rapidly blinked, hoping his eyes deceived him. But when he locked eyes with the group again, the men looked like teenage boys, wearing their tan shirts and long green shorts. The Scoutmaster remained his current age, caressing each boy's back. Jordan, are you seeing this? Jordan? What the hell's going on? I have no idea. Before they could say anything more, the glass from the chandelier burst into thousands of pieces. Jordan and Colt were unable to avoid the shards that pierced their shoulders. The 100E. Other guests carried on as if the glass wasn't falling into their food and drinks. Jordan yelped as a shard sliced the top of his ear. He cupped his ear, but blood trickled through his fingertips. Colt reached to help, but then hit the floor as two more chandeliers exploded along with the last lingering light in the room. In the darkness, Colt saw the faint flicker of a flashlight. The light illuminated the faces of a dozen boys, all different ages, bringing their forefingers to the brim of their hats. Some of the boys wore the older uniforms Colt only saw in photographs, sporting 5-button choke-collar coats and canvas leggings. Their faces looked older too, with stoic expressions and oil-slicked hair sticking out of their caps. In unison, the boys recited the code. On my honor, I will do my best to do my duty to God and my country and obey the Scout law, help other people at all times, keep myself physically strong, mentally awake, and morally straight. Despite standing right in front of him, the boys' voices were hollow and grainy. They sounded as if they were pre-recorded on a wax cylinder, gramophone, or an even older device. The boys repeated the oath once more, their words bellowing in the darkness. The words, help other people at all times, caused Colt to tremble as the light shined on the Scoutmaster's equally stoic expression. Guys, are you okay? Hello? As two fingers snapped, Colt and Jordan regained a sense of their surroundings. The lobby returned to its former glory with all the lights, tree bulbs, glass, and even Jordan's ear intact. They brushed themselves off, anxiously checking their surroundings. It took several seconds for them to gather their composure and move into the reception room with the other guests. What the hell was that? Jade asked. I don't know. By the time they began to comprehend the preceding events, the guests were seated in the reception hall, which was filled to the brim with beautifully hand-carved wooden chairs. Sasha and Jade gawked at the elegant white runner and the rose-covered altar, while Colt and Jordan scanned the crowd for anyone who looked the slightest bit unusual or out of place. When they were sure that their minds were cohesive, the reception commenced. For some reason, Colt felt an overwhelming sense of drowsiness when Scoutmaster Jeff took his place by the altar. He could barely keep his eyes open when Caleb walked down the aisle. Unlike his invitation picture, he seemed full of life with his raised cheeks and a wide smile. He met Colt's gaze for only a moment before his eyes darted elsewhere. As the groomsmen and bridesmaids took their positions, Colt's head nodded up and down, his muscle tone decreasing, thoughts draining to inconsequential images of a teenage Jordan and Colt playing cards in the tent, Jordan entering another tent, Caleb standing alone on the docks, and Benji drinking a can of beer. As Caleb and Samantha were pronounced husband and wife, these images drained to darkness. Colt knew he wasn't sleeping, however, as his body led him to the dining area of the hall, where the four of them were seated at a table of 8. "That was beautiful," Sasha said, a bit teary-eyed. "I meant the ceremony, of course. It was quite a good ceremony." Jordan yawned. "I'm not into all that religious stuff, but their vows were beautiful." "I agree. I often thought about what my wedding would be like." "What did you think, Colt?" Jade waved a hand in front of Colt's face. "Earth to Colt?" "Yeah, no, it was good. I'm just tired." A boy with a khaki green shirt and pants came into his line of sight, gaping at Scoutmaster Jeff from a nearby punch bowl. "Hey, do you guys see that weird kid by the punch bowl?" "Colt." "That's not nice," Jade said. "But yes, it's kind of weird to see a kid wearing a Boy Scout uniform." The boy took slow, almost robotic movements toward Scoutmaster Jeff's chair. "No, he is weird," Sasha said. "Who dresses their kid like that for a wedding?" "Oh God, Jordan, what's wrong now? You two have been acting weird and quiet all night." "I saw that same kid when I was little." Jordan's voice cracked when he spoke. "We were camping on Gardner Lake. He was standing on the docks, just staring out into the darkness. He wanted me to bring him the Scoutmaster. By the time I brought the Scoutmaster there, he was gone." "That's creepy," Sasha said, flicking the band of her watch. "But it can't be the same kid, Jordan. That was many years ago." "No, Sash, he's wearing the same uniform he did that day. You see that hat he's wearing? It's called a beret or garrison cap. My dad wore the same thing when he was a scout in the 70s. The four of them watched as the boy tapped the Scoutmaster on his shoulder. Scoutmaster Jeff turned around, his jaw dropping as he saw the little boy. The other adults at the table smiled widely at the little boys. Presents, many wondering out loud if he was a family member or related to someone in the wedding party. "Can I help you?" Scoutmaster Jeff asked, forcing a joyful tone. "You're dressed up tonight. If you tell the truth, you will save us all," the boy said, his face and tone completely deadpan. What was that, buddy?" "If you tell the truth, you will save us all," the boy screamed, drawing the table to complete silence. At the end of the table, someone shattered a wine glass. "I'm sorry. Is your mommy or daddy nearby?" "Your parents are my parents," the boy said, firmly. "If you tell the truth, you will save us all." All eyes were on the Scoutmaster and the boy. All voices ceased, save for the distant wedding band. The Scoutmaster stood up from the table and knelt at the boy's level. "I'm sorry, everyone. I recognize you now, William. You've gotten so big. I'm sorry, everyone. That's my cousin Henry's kid. His family's going through a tough time." The Scoutmaster grabbed the boy by the hand and squeezed. "Your daddy went outside to get some fresh air. Let's go find him. Your parents are my parents," the boy screamed as the Scoutmaster whisked him away through the grand double doors that led to the courtyard by the lake. "Our parents are dead. If you tell the truth, you will save us all." As the door slammed behind them, almost everyone in the venue returned to normal activity and chatter. Sasha, Jordan, Colt, and Jade glanced at each other and then back at the door several times before Colt rose to his feet and crept out the same doors into the bitter night. A few moments later, Jordan and the others followed. The stone courtyard, a popular feature in the summer and fall, remained completely dark, its moss walls blanketed by snow and ice. Beyond the walls of the courtyard, Colt spotted the Scoutmaster and the boy standing on the venue's wooden dock. covered in poinsettia petals from a photo shoot. Hours earlier, a black and white motorized fishing boat was moored to the docks. "They're on the dock over there. And that's the Scoutmaster's boat," Colt said, hands stiff in his jacket pockets. The others gathered around him, each placing a hand on his waist. "They're just yelling at each other, but I can't hear what they're saying." "What are you planning to do, Colt?" Jordan's voice trembled at the word do. "Whatever you're doing, please be careful." Jade followed. Sasha nodded. "What's the plan, Colt?" "What do you mean?" Colt said. "You guys aren't going to try and stop me?" They shook their heads. "We've been through too much together these past few months," Sasha whispered. "I'm going to stop him," Colt stated firmly. "He's hurt too many people." A cold breeze blew in from the lake. From inside the venue, they could hear the band playing the recessional song and loud cheers as the wedding party entered the room. As the music and cheers carried into the night, the Scoutmaster glanced over his shoulder, taking a few steps away from the boy. Then he ran a full sprint back into the venue, not even noticing them. "You, want to go back in, Colt?" Jade asked, as the Scoutmaster's voice boomed. Over the mic, triggering more cheers, he shook his head. "You want to talk to the kid, don't you?" Jordan sighed as Colt uttered "yeah" under his misty breath. "Do you want us to come with you?" "Only if you're comfortable." "None of us are comfortable," Sasha replied with an awkward chuckle. "But let's go find out what the weird kid wants." As the four of them trudged through the snow, the young boy echoed part of the Boy Scout chant into the wind with strength and repetition. "Help other people at all times. Help other people at all times. Help other people at all times." As they stepped onto the dock, Colt gently placed a hand on the boy's shoulders. The boy felt cold to the touch, colder than the harsh December wind. He expected his hand to go through the boy, but it remained firm as the boy glanced up at him. "I failed," the boy said in a low, solemn tone. "I failed my oath." "What oath?" "To help other people at all times. I grew up to hurt other people. I grew up to be a monster. And that monster doesn't want to save any of us." Colt heard the boy sob, deep, uncontrollable sobs. "Are you, Jeffrey?" The boy nodded, tears piercing the dock like fallen icicles. "But how? How is that possible?" "Scoutmaster Jeff is," as the boy wept, Jordan spoke hoarsely. "Alive. You're a living ghost and a curio, aren't you, Jeffrey?" The boy nodded again. As he continued to sob, each tear froze and dissipated on the wooden dock. "A what?" the ladies muttered collectively. "An Ikirio is a living ghost. The Japanese believe that an Ikirio is a disembodied spirit that leaves the body of a living person to haunt people or places, sometimes nearby, sometimes across close distances." The three of them stood, jaw agape, as the boy stopped weeping. "Why are you here?" either Jade or Sasha asked. Colt couldn't tell. He was feeling drowsy again. "I've always been here," the boy said coldly. "What do you plan to do tonight?" "I need them to see me. I need them to see the others." "Do we have Ikirios?" Jordan asked, his voice now a faint whisper. The boy's frosty blue eyes affirmed his question. "Where are they?" "In the sinking house. With those words," the boy began to shriek, his jaw stretching to inhuman proportions, his eyes retreating into their sockets. The shriek was so audible and unsettling that it caused the icicles overhanging the venue to crash into the courtyard. The shriek carried into the depths of the night, shattering the light from the stars and the ominous blue moon. In darkness once more, Colt not only felt drowsy, but as if he was falling, much like the way he fell into the abyss of Gardner Lake as a timid 13-year-old. "Ladies and gentlemen," Colt heard the Scoutmaster's voice as he drifted back into consciousness. He found himself standing on the dance floor next to the others who were visibly shaken, especially Jordan with moist eyes and teeth chattering. Caleb and Samantha Saunders will take their first dance as husband and wife. As Colt saw light again, the crowd cheered as the newlyweds took their place on the dance floor. "Let's get the hell out of here after this," Sasha harshly whispered. "I have no idea what's going on." The first dance commenced, drowning out Jade and Jordan's words. For some reason, the band was shrouded in darkness. The spotlight shined on the couple as they took their places, gazing tenderly into each other's eyes. Colt was surprised about how genuinely Caleb looked at her. She looked beautiful, however, and Colt found himself genuinely happy as they began to dance to a song he recognized by the band, Lifehouse, but forgot the name of. "This is the first normal thing about tonight," Colt said. All the others could do was nod and smile hesitantly as the two glided across the dance floor in an elegant waltz. As the minutes passed, they smiled warmly at the happy couple and clapped as they moved into a break with an underarm turn. "You both are right," Jordan said, not knowing whether to smile warmly or shiver at the thought of something else happening. "This is surprisingly beautiful, but let's make our exit after." Suddenly, the music stopped and the spotlight shifted from the happy couple to the little boy, who was now holding a sleek silver condenser microphone with a long handle. The feedback from the microphone caused many people to cover their ears. "I would like to dedicate a song to the happy couple to free the spirits within us tonight." The audience awkwardly clapped as the spotlight shifted to Scoutmaster Jeff. The hesitant clapping turned to loud, raucous applause as the boy motioned for the Scoutmaster to step up to the microphone. "I would like my cousin to sing this song with me." The boy's voice became distorted, and the feedback from the microphone increased, booming so violently that the crowd ducked and gasped as it boomed into the walls. The Scoutmaster shook his head furiously, but then the boy curled the mic's handle, causing him to slide across the floor into the center of the dance floor. "I think the band knows this song." The boy twisted the mic again, and the band started to play the familiar awful song that had haunted the lake for many years. The five-piece band was stunned as they started the notes of Swanee River. The piano player and saxophonist appeared to be losing control of their fingers, while the bass player and guitarist seemed to enjoy the notes coming from their instruments, eyes completely glazed over. The boy twisted the microphone twice more, subsequently twisting the jaw of Scoutmaster Jeff and the movements of Caleb and Samantha into a smooth swing. He laughed heartily, extracting the notes and movements of the godforsaken song from all involved. Way down upon the Swanee River far, far away, there's where my heart is turning ever, there's where the old folks stay. As the boy sang, the band played, and the Scoutmaster unwittingly sang along. The ground underneath them shook, shifting the tables and chairs. The audience screamed along with the band as they scrambled to grab their instruments and stay afloat. Jordan helped Sasha to her feet, and Jade helped Colt to his while the boy remained at the microphone, singing the chorus once again. This time, the words caused Colt to have an even sharper migraine. Then a bright flash exploded across the room, overwhelming Colt with countless memories. Colt saw himself at 12 in the living room with Scoutmaster Jeff and his father. His father was sobbing and angry. The Scoutmaster explained to him that his urges were natural, but required self-control. Colt saw himself at 13 in a dark tent, waking up to the Scoutmaster breathing down his neck. The Scoutmaster explained that Colt had a medical emergency and needed monitoring. Colt saw himself at 11, asking Jordan why he was crying, after he came home from a fishing trip that Colt had missed due to being ill. Jordan told him he had taken a bad fall and had an upper leg injury to show it. Colt saw himself at 14, a year after he quit Scouts, talking to Jordan in the cafeteria about Benji being arrested in the parking lot of a 7-Eleven, smashing beer bottles and screaming. Benji claimed in court that his father had abused him. Colt remembered Scoutmaster Jeff picking him up from high school and bringing him to AA meetings. Colt saw himself as a sophomore in college, abruptly ending a romantic encounter after being touched below his waistline. Later that night, Colt cried to Jade that he didn't know why he was so scared. When the bright flash ended, Jordan and Colt looked up at the ladies with tears in their eyes. "Scoutmaster Jeff is a monster," Jordan screamed, pushing a chair to a table. "I was only a kid, I was only a..." Sasha grabbed Jordan and pulled him in closer while he screamed into her chest. "I never knew why," Colt said as Jade hugged him. "I never knew why I was so scared until I remembered what that man did to me." The crowd was abuzz with chatter as several more men, including Benji and Caleb, approached the Scoutmaster who stood unmoved as 4 men approached him from all sides, each one more rage-filled than the other. "You said my father caused my bruises, but he never touched me," Benji screamed, raising a fist to his face. "I should kill you right now. You told me I couldn't like guys and girls." Caleb took a step closer as the scoutmaster bit his upper lip. "My parents sent me to therapy because of you, but they didn't believe me when I told them. I can't." Caleb stormed off into the vast sea of angry and confused faces, which were gathering nearer as the men continued to shout. Samantha frantically chased after him. "Our parents trusted you," a dark-skinned man with a fedora said solemnly, grabbing the lapels of the scoutmaster's jacket. His twin brother, who wore a matching fedora, hung his head low, shaking violently. "They trusted you to take us on a fishing trip because they both had to work. You know what you did to us." The scoutmaster took a few steps back. The crowd of over 100 people, including the band, stepped closer to the scoutmaster, shouting and swearing. The little boy stood motionless in the middle of the floor. The scoutmaster scrambled to the serving table and grabbed a butcher, knife raising it in the air. "What are you gonna do with that?" Benji shouted. "Are you going to stab us all? I dare you to try. How about you start with me first?" With the knife trembling in his hand, the scoutmaster took a step toward the boy, stabbing the butcher knife into his neck. The boy dropped to his knees, grasping his neck, but no blood fell through the gash. The boy tried to scream, but no sound emerged. As his eyes rolled back into their sockets, his image untethered like a ball of yarn, each string a vibrant color of his original image. Colt ran toward the boy, attempting to grab a hold of the strings. But as each strand fell into the palm of his hands, they disappeared into thin air. Colt fell into blackness again. "You seriously forgot?" Sasha giggled. Jordan played with her hair until she smacked his hand away. "Hun, we're going to Samantha's wedding today." "You were sleeping all day," Jade said. "You were talking really loudly in your sleep and said you never knew why." "Oh no," Colt said. "Oh no, it couldn't have been some dream you were having," Jordan said. "You were saying Scoutmaster Jeff was a monster, and his Akirio was there, and I haven't heard that word in a long time. Was that the one we had when we were kids?" "Yes, he's the officiating pastor today." "He's right," Sasha said, looking up from her phone. "Were you close with this guy?" "We all were," Colt shouted. "It couldn't have been a dream. It couldn't have." "Maybe you were," Jordan said, "but I barely remember the guy." "That's impossible. How could you forget what he did to us? How could you forget what he did to Benji and Caleb?" "Benji and Caleb, those guys who used to bully us? Did he punish them? If so, they deserved it. Phew, they were real jerks." Jade put an arm around his shoulder and directed him to his room. "We've been through a lot these past few months, more than anyone should have to go through. I don't know who this guy is, but if you want to stay home, you can—" "No," Colt shouted. "No, it must have been an awful dream. I was at the wedding, and so much strange stuff happened, supernatural even. We all need therapy of some sort," she said. "I'm starting again when my insurance clears. And even Sasha and Jordan were talking about it too. If you're having dreams like this, maybe you should—" "Yeah, what he did to us wasn't a dream, though. Will you talk to him about this?" Jade agreed. But for the entirety of the car ride, Colt stayed silent just as he had done all those years. He was beginning to forget too. He was beginning to forget what exactly it was Scoutmaster Jeff had done. Even his face was starting to become blurry. The anger and sadness deep inside Colt remained. When Colt's friends asked him if he was okay, he couldn't even nod. He just stared straight ahead at the windshield wipers as they crushed the slush and icicles. When they arrived at the venue, there was an inordinate amount of people standing out in the cold. They scattered around the venue and by the shores of the lake. Some of the guests carried flashlights. Another one pulled a barking dog on a leash. As Jordan pulled into the parking lot, Samantha rushed up to the car in her off-white wedding dress, a mixture of makeup and tears rolling down her cheeks. Sasha and Jade threw their arms around her. "What's wrong, sweetie? Why's everyone out here?" "It's awful. We can't find Caleb." All morning he was talking about some terrible dream he had, and none of it made sense. He talked about having to find a house. I don't know. I thought he was over it when he got to the venue, but when it was time for the photo shoot, no one could find him. That's terrible, Jade exclaimed. Colt, where are you going? Colt? As his friends shouted, Colt started sprinting toward the rear of the venue. The snow was thick, knee-deep to his ankles, and he wasn't particularly good at running. After almost tripping over a jagged rock and narrowly smashing into a stone bench, he reached the courtyard. Colt bent over to catch his breath. By the docks, he saw Scoutmaster Jeff in his black and white motorized fishing boat. As Colt neared the docks, the Scoutmaster waved to him. By golly, the Scoutmaster said, if it isn't Colt Chambers from Troop 0172. It's been ages. I don't know if you've heard, but our groom has disappeared. I could use a good scout and a fine man like you to help. Sure, Colt said, stepping into the boat. Did he have his boat on him? It's the darndest thing. Colt cringed as the Scoutmaster threw an arm around him. I know he has a kayak, but no one knows. You've become nice and strong. You're so grown up now. He might be in the middle of the lake, so why do you say that? Or just a feeling? As the boat sped toward the center of Gardner Lake, Colt shivered. He felt his hands go numb, sweat dripping down the back of his suit to his waist. Despite all that, he remained completely still. Gray and black clouds hid the ominous blue moon. The lake was silent. Not even a cool winter breeze passed their way. Colt instructed the Scoutmaster to shut off the boat in case they could hear any yelling. As the Scoutmaster turned the key, Colt wrung both his hands around his neck and squeezed as hard as he could. To Colt's surprise, he didn't move. His neck was too meaty, so Colt put him in a chokehold, squeezing him even tighter. I know what you did to Caleb that day on the boat, 15 years ago. Don't you dare look at me that way, not now, not anymore. That's why you brought him out here. He remembers everything, and so do I. I remember everything you did to us, every awful, disgusting thing. The thing you didn't count on was all the disembodied spirits you created from what you did. You can't keep them in the house forever. And you can't kill them all. Even if you killed him, even if you kill me, they'll still be there. Scoutmaster thrust Colt's arms away, freeing himself from the chokehold. As Colt stood up, Scoutmaster Jeff punched his nose, which caused him to stumble backward, falling overboard into the water. Despite being a good swimmer, Colt fainted at the sight of blood and sank rapidly, deep into a dark abyss. He awoke to find his body smashing through a pine door. His body kept sinking until he hit an oak staircase. Just as he was about to double, over in agony, he felt something pull him. He glanced up to see Caleb completely unharmed and smiled gleefully. Surrounding Caleb were several other beings he couldn't quite discern except for the green outline of their Boy Scout uniforms, each patched with the words Troop 0172. Their faces were warped and pixelated. Their hairstyles looked strikingly familiar, however, to the type Colt and his friends wore as teenagers. He even recognized one with the man bun Jordan had as a teenager, and the blue-streaked, spiky hair Benji wore. Colt, Caleb, and the beings, which now numbered several dozen, pushed their way to the surface as the never-ending cavity walls of the old colonial house fell beneath them. The portraits on those walls were empty. The last part of the house that fell past him was a living room, with a mahogany grand piano. At the bench of the piano sat the little boy with a khaki green shirt and pants, smiling sheepishly as the house collapsed once and for all into the depths of the lake. Colt and Caleb were the first ones to emerge from the water. The black and white speedboat circled the perimeter, its propellers chopping through the waves. As soon as the Scoutmaster noticed where they were, he put his boat into reverse and accelerated toward them, its aluminum propellers cutting toward them like a buzzsaw on firewood. The rapid movement of the propellers and screeching sound left them frozen with no time to react. When the blades were inches away from their heads, Colt saw a dozen warped and pixelated faces emerge from the water from one side of the boat, and then a dozen more from the other. The sight of the faces startled the Scoutmaster as he stumbled backward off the pedal. 4 of the beings crawled into the boat and grabbed a hold of the Scoutmaster's legs and arms, tossing him like a rag doll into the water. The Scoutmaster screamed as the beings piled on him and pulled him underneath the now crashing waves. Colt and Caleb climbed into the fishing boat and spent the next several minutes catching their breath as the submerged screams faded away. The lake grew silent once more. As Caleb turned the keys in the ignition, he heard the tinny, creaky notes of Swanee River echo into the night. The constant low monotone droning grows increasingly louder. Jeremy tosses and turns as his eyes creep open. Jeremy, "Hey, Beck," he says, still practically asleep. Beck begins to stir. Beck, "What?" Jeremy, "Do you hear it now?" Beck rolls her eyes in frustration. Beck, "Yes, Jeremy, I hear it. I've already told you I talked to Morgan about it. Apparently his fridge is messed up. He said he'd get it fixed later this month." Jeremy, "Is his fridge a fucking nuclear reactor?" Beck slowly closes her eyes in response. Beck, "Yes. Now let's go to sleep. Unlike you, I have to work in 4 hours." Beck pulls the covers over her eyes, ending the conversation. Jeremy rolls over onto his back and stares a hole into the apartment above. The droning continues throughout the night. It never wavers. Constant. The sound of Beck's alarm clock rattles for what feels like hours, almost matching the pitch of the busted-up fridge next door. Jeremy throws himself out of bed and puts his slippers on. He snoozes the alarm and shakes Beck enough to wake her up. "Beck, I'm up. Jeremy shuffles to the kitchen and swings the fridge open, then grabs a half carton of milk, downing the rest of the remaining liquid. Beck walks in with her maroon suit hanging off of her shoulder. Jeremy, "Big case today?" Beck, "Not really, mostly just paperwork. I thought I'd give this nice suit a little use, though." Jeremy, Cool. He looks over his shoulder, at the wall separating his and Morgan's apartment. Jeremy, "I think I might go talk to Morgan. Look at his fridge or something." Beck, "Leave the poor hick alone. Your constant ramblings keep me up more than the damn fridge." Jeremy, Okay, I'll refrain." Beck, "Well, I'd better get going." Beck grabs her keys in a hurry and hugs Jeremy. Beck, "I'm hanging out with Rebecca after I close this case, so I'll probably be home late." Jeremy, "Sounds good. I love you. Good luck on the case." Beck, "You too." Beck quickly closes the door. Immediately, almost as if on cue, the constant droning ceases. Jeremy sighs, exhausted. Jeremy, thank God. He then plops on the couch as his eyes flutter shut. After a peaceful 3 hours, the hum begins. Jeremy jolts awake. Jeremy, "For the love of God, Morgan." Jeremy swings his apartment door open and gives 217, Morgan's room, a thunderous knock. Jeremy, "Hey Morgan, it's Jeremy. Can we talk for a few?" 217's door creaks open, revealing a landfill of an apartment, and in front of it all, an old man looking to be in his mid-60s. Morgan blows cigarette smoke through his numerous missing teeth that complemented his scraggly beard. Morgan, "Fuck, do you want it?" Morgan put the cigarette back between his lips. Jeremy, "When did you say you were going to fix that fridge? I can't stand the noise." Morgan, "Already fixed it. Unplugged her this morning." Jeremy contorts his face in confusion. Jeremy, "I can hear it right now. Don't bullshit me." Jeremy raised his voice. Morgan, "I don't know what you're accusing me of, but my fridge is as quiet as a damn mouse." Jeremy, "Real fucking funny. Do you have nothing better to do, you troglodyte?" Morgan, "Get a fucking job, Jeremy." Morgan shuts the door. Jeremy felt a wave of relief as the smell of tobacco escaped his nose. He then storms back to his own apartment. Six's door opens gently. Jeremy's blood runs cold. His eyes widen, unnaturally. There it was. The fridge in the center of Jeremy's room, shaking and humming violently, growing louder by the second, wafting the smell of rotten meat in his apartment. Without a moment's hesitation, Jeremy beelined to room 217. His fist pounds on the door. Jeremy, "Real fucking funny, Morgan. Get your fridge out of my damn apartment." Morgan's voice muffled by the door. Morgan, "You got anything better to do, you damn pansy?" Morgan wedges open his door. Morgan, "I've been trying to cut you some slack since I know you aren't the smartest tool in the shed, but whatever problems are going on in your marriage, I don't have the answers, so leave me out of it." Jeremy scowls with a hint of confusion. Jeremy, Waha, that's not even how you use that. What the hell? Don't play dumb with me, you cigarette-smoking hick. He waved Morgan to follow him to 216. Jeremy. And what the hell is that horrendous smell? Jeremy stretches his arm out, motioning to the center of his room. Dread rushed into his body like water to an empty glass. There was no fridge. There was no sound. The silence was deafening beyond human comprehension. Morgan. Looks like the two lesbians who live here don't know how to decorate. Morgan flicks his cigarette butt to the ground. Morgan. Last warning, big man. If you bother me again, I'm going to be forced to complain to Jeff. Jeremy's hand loses the fight with gravity and joins him by his side. Jeremy. What? How did you... As Morgan walks back to 217, he mutters. Morgan. Poor Beck. The sound of 217's door shutting bounced off the walls of Jeremy's ears, echoing back to him. He whispers to the apartment in front of him, Jeremy. It was here in this room. It was here. Jeremy searches the whole house for any possible entries or intruders for most of the remaining hours in the day. Jeremy has collected himself for the most part, but is still a little shaken up. 216's knob jiggles as Beck enters the apartment. Exasperated sigh escapes Beck's mouth. Beck, go to law school, they said. It'll be fun, they said. Beck says, defeated. Jeremy enters from the bedroom. Jeremy. Hey, Beck, can we talk? Beck. Sure, but if it has to do with Morgan or the fridge, get comfy on the couch because you're sleeping there. Jeremy. Beck. Please listen. Beck's face takes a more serious tone. Beck, what is it? Jeremy. Morgan is messing with me. He put his fright. Beck. Jeremy, can I please have one moment of peace? You can't keep doing this. Jeremy grabs Beck's shoulders firmly. Jeremy, please just listen to me for 5 seconds. Beck begins to scowl as she shoves him. Beck, I can't do this right now. I'm going to go stay with my parents for a couple of days. Look for a job and work on yourself. Beck storms to the bedroom and starts collecting her stuff. Jeremy, what a shame there's no condescending bitch in the house for a few days. Jeremy whips his body to the wall, separating his apartment and Morgan's. Jeremy. You hear that, Morgan? Give my compliments to the fridge, fat fuck. Beck rushes to the door. Beck, do better. Beck quickly closes the door. The noise had to have found a new apartment to torment. The droning has not appeared since the 17th. After Beck's departure, Jeremy has had trouble sleeping, waking up from 2:05 p.m. most days. Jeremy's unmotivated, eyes stared into the pixels on his screen, the time reading 3:22 a.m., and the photo of him and Beck on their wedding day began to stare back at him, his eyes slightly wet. Jeremy felt a slight lump grow in his throat, so he rose to go get a glass of water. Jeremy staggers into the living room. He grabs a glass and fills it with filtered water from his fridge. The glass is brought to Jeremy's lips. Knock, knock. The glass slips slightly from Jeremy's hand. He stabilizes himself and listens to where the knocking originated from. After a moment, he hears it again and pinpoints it to a spot on the wall separating 216 and 217. Knock, knock. Jeremy, with a confused look on his face, puts the glass down and approaches the wall. Knock, knock. It raised in volume, but without the dead silence of night, he'd probably not even notice it. Jeremy presses his ear up to the part of the wall the sound is emanating from. Jeremy. What the? Knock, knock. It was now very audible. Roughly, as loud as someone having a conversation. Knock, knock. Jeremy jumped backwards, the noise pounding against his eardrum because of how closely he leaned inward. Knock, knock. Jeremy fell on his back towards the living room. Jeremy, stop, whatever you are, please. Knock, knock. Jeremy buried his head in his hands, covering his ears. Knock, knock. Jeremy, God, please make it stop. Jeremy wailed as he curled up in a ball. Then all was quiet. The silence of the night returned. Jeremy felt a wave of relief wash over him. As he began to catch his breath, his eyes fell back toward the spot the knocks were echoing from. Horror filled every inch of his body. He would rather have the knocks last 1,000 years than to observe the sight that was unfolding in front of him for even a fleeting moment. A small part of the wall began to push out from the wall. The wall morphed like rubber. Something was trying to get into 216. Whatever it was in Morgan's apartment, and it was trying to destroy his very sanity. A small point in the wall stretched a foot from its original spot. Jeremy, it'll kill me. As the words fell out of Jeremy's mouth, the wall cracked open at a breakneck speed. A small black tendril surrounded by a dark ooze stretched roughly 2 feet from the wall. Jeremy. Fuck! Jeremy screamed. The tendril slithered back into 217, revealing the ruined apartment behind the hole. Jeremy's heart was in his skull. Jeremy. Ah! Jeremy screamed incoherently. He closed his eyes, looking for any sense of peace. His eyes fought him to stay closed as he attempted to reopen them. After finally winning the internal conflict, he saw it for the first time. A large red eye stared at him from 217. Jeremy mutters a little louder than a whisper. Jeremy, what do you want from me? Shock fills Jeremy's body. This creature was going to bring his end at any moment. The glaring silence is crushed by a voice. Morgan, what in tarnation is going on in there? Morgan said in a tired yet stern voice from his bedroom. The eldritch eyes sank below the hole instinctively. Jeremy blurted, "Get the hell out of there and call the police." Morgan, there is someone or something in your apartment. Morgan leaned up to the hole and let out a large sigh. Morgan, now if I see your Johnson go through this, I'll have to introduce you to my 12 gauge, you hear? Jeremy's face took on an extremely serious tone. Jeremy, this isn't a fucking joke. Get the fuck out of there now, Morgan. Morgan's eye now replacing the creature's in almost parody. Morgan, I'll take my chances, big man. Morgan snickers to himself. Morgan, now this is property damage, Jeremy. If I had no sense of you, I'd think you were trying to get into my humble little apartment. Morgan lets out a half smile. Morgan, let's say you, me, and Jeff have a little chat tomorrow. How does that sound, champ? Maybe after we can have a drink or two. Morgan begins to slowly back away from the hole and retreat to his room, not awaiting a response. Jeremy, I hope it fucking kills you, Morgan, Jeremy whispers. I don't know who is reading this, but I have to write my thoughts down in case something happens to me. My name is Jeremy Steenitz. I live on the second story in room 216 in the old apartment off Selter Street. There is some entity tormenting me in my apartment. It's not attempting to kill me, yet I have no doubt it will. The monster seems to be trying to scare me with noise or small visions of it. Just taunting me. My hypothesis is that it feeds off of fear, so it's trying to squeeze me dry of all the fear it can before taking my life. It probably saves killing for last so it can squeeze you dry of all the fear you are capable of. I believe it can appear and disappear at will. It was in Morgan's apartment, then it wasn't. It is trying to make me seem crazy to others to isolate me so it can kill me in peace. I have to try to compose myself and keep it to myself at all costs. If my theories are right, it shouldn't hurt or move on to anyone else till it's done with me. Otherwise, Morgan would be dealing with it too. Maybe the reasoning is if I had anyone who understood, I'd be less fearful, and by proxy, less tasty. I haven't had a good look at its appearance, but its skin is a weird black viscous sludge, also having huge red pools for eyes. The hue of its huge eyes is akin to blood. When you look into them, the only thing staring back at you is dread beyond human comprehension. It's like watching an indescribable evil unfold in front of you. Tomorrow I'll pretend that everything is okay. When I talk to Morgan and Jeff, I'll apologize. I can't get kicked out of this apartment. I have to kill it here. It is real. It can be killed. I will kill it. I must. I won't let it hurt Beck any more than it already has. Sunlight creeps through the living room window. Jeremy drifted off for a mere 20 minutes before his body jolted him awake. Jeremy let out a sigh. Jeremy, let's get this over with already. Jeremy finds his footing and staggers his way to a standing position. King's doorknob has never felt so cold. Fear was on the other side of the door, and Jeremy could feel it. Jeremy turns the knob and cracks the door. Momentum then slowly opens the door the rest of the way. Then Jeremy's eyes fell upon it. The beast writhed and shook before him, almost imitating the fridge from days prior. The red pools for eyes filled with rage. Its mouth gaped open with rows and rows of teeth. The black ooze that draped over its body wiggled up and down its 7-foot-tall skeleton. Jeremy became lightheaded, his body freezing at the sight. Jeremy. Hello. Jeremy dreaded every syllable that left his mouth. The creature stepped towards him. He tried to move, but his body revolted. The monster's mouth opens wider. A low droning escapes its nightmarish body. Deneo Gyortnik Yuvkuk. Rage bubbles up in Jeremy. Jeremy, you fucking bastard, leave me alone. Jeremy walked a little further into the ruined apartment. Almost all his fear felt as if it had been converted to anger. The figure lunges towards him baring its impossibly sharp teeth. Its fingers stretch out and become the aforementioned tendrils, just as terrifying as they were the night prior. The tendrils wrapped around Jeremy's torso and legs, the eldritch horror pinning him to the wall. It begins to crack, almost breaking by sheer force. Jeremy winds back his fist and drives it into the large creature's snout. The monster writhed as it moaned. Shrug. Jeremy's vision began to blur. In desperation, he began to flail his arms, grasping for anything he could get his hands on. His hands then scraped against deer antlers mounted to his top right. Jeremy's head felt like it could explode. His consciousness began to fade. Then, instinctively, Jeremy's fingers wrapped around the base of the antlers above him. The antlers sliced through the air, jutting through the figure's jaw, sprouting out of its mouth. The pools in its head began to dim as if it were a robot losing power. The monster's grasp loosened. It stumbled backwards and let out a wet gurgle. Its side clashes with the hardwood floor. Jeremy tried to catch his breath and collect himself, but the deceased entity's cold, dead eyes gazed upon him. Then that's when the melting started. It began to melt into the floorboards. Jeremy began to scramble as he hyperventilated. He tried to speak, but only silence could escape his mouth. The figure seeped into the floorboards, its eyes, fluid now, seeping into the cracks. It was gone, like it had never even been there. Jeremy stared in silence where the monster had once been. After what felt like a decade, he was able to find his way back to his small apartment. Peace rushed over Jeremy. The monster was no more. He would not be subjected to torment any longer. Beck was safe. He then got some long overdue sleep only, to be interrupted by a polite knock on the door. Jeremy slowly sits up, much more relaxed than days prior. Jeremy. Coming, Jeremy says in a defeated tone. After opening the door, Jeremy's eyes were filled with the wonderful woman he married a year ago. Beck shot him a half smile. Beck. Sorry if I'm interrupting your classic 4:23 evening nap, Beck said jokingly. Jeremy. Busy schedule, but I think I can fit you in. Jeremy gestured into the apartment. Note 2. Hello, if you are reading this, you must have read my other note. This will very likely be my final note. I've killed the beast or whatever that thing was. I will most likely be taking this experience to my grave. It writhed and shook before me, and I murdered it in Morgan's apartment. I still haven't spoken with him yet about the hole in the wall, but I did fix it with some plaster I got from Home Depot. His apartment has been eerily quiet since I made the hole. I hope I didn't piss him off too badly. Usually I hear him and some broad he picked up off the street, or his busted-up TV, due to the extremely thin walls. The exception being last night it sounded like 5 to 7 people rummaging around in there. Hope the stupid hick got robbed. Nonetheless, the silence has been appreciated. I've been job hunting mostly, trying to put this engineering degree to work. After my multiple encounters with the supernatural entity, I've been a bit shaken. But I think my bearings have returned. With Beck being here, everything feels like it'll be all right. But just in case, I bought myself a shotgun from a local gun store. This is Jeremy Stayantez signing off. With Beck's return, life had once more been breathed into the apartment. Jeremy clicked through advertisements for future jobs. As the blue light from his laptop digs into his eyes, he is interrupted by a thud from his front door. Beck, I'll get it. Beck puts down the bowl she was cleaning and swiftly makes her way to the front door. The door swings open, revealing 2 police officers. A scrawny, younger-looking officer stood behind a tall, square-shouldered man. The larger one spoke through his handlebar mustache. "Thomas, hello there, miss." The officer looked down at his flipped-open notepad. "Thomas, I have no idea how to say that last name." Beck interrupts him. "Beck. Stinetz." Thomas then clears his throat. "Thomas. Miss Stinetz, I'm Officer Kench. Do you mind if we ask you and your husband some questions?" Beck turned, giving Jeremy a confused look. Jeremy shrugs his shoulders and approaches the door. Jeremy. "Seems fine enough. What's up, officers?" he said casually. Thomas then readjusted his eyes to Beck. "Thomas. Miss Stinetz, would you mind following Officer Higley to chat with him separately?" Thomas gestured to his right. "Beck, I guess that's fine." Beck stated in an obviously uncomfortable tone. "Higley, right this way," the young man said in an overly bubbly attitude. Higley starts walking away. Beck quickly follows suit. Jeremy's causality flickers a tad. "Jeremy, what's up, officer?" Thomas. "I can't disclose details of the case, but I need to know the last contact you had with your neighbor Morgan in 217. Thomas stated firmly. Jeremy. "What? Morgan? Is everything okay?" Thomas. "We can't say any details of the case at this time. Please answer the question, Jeremy." Jeremy's face contorts in confusion. Jeremy. "Well, I mean, we aren't traditional friends, but we share good moments. He is a bitter old man, yet he knows the right things to say at the right times," Jeremy said sincerely. Thomas's brow tightens as he thinks. Thomas. Well, your landlord Jeff tells me y'all weren't too fond of each other." Thomas asked inquisitively. Jeremy's face melts to a softer tone. Jeremy. "We definitely had disagreements, but he and Beck were some of the only people that truly comforted me during my mother's passing last spring." Thomas. "Any disagreements as of recent that have upset you or Beck in any way?" Jeremy's head filled with their interactions that took place days prior. Jeremy. No. Thomas looks down and writes something on his notepad. Thomas. "Interesting. I think that's about it for now, but we might ask you to come to the station for a testimony someday soon." Jeremy's waited with bated breath for Beck's return to the second floor. Jeremy. "Yeah, sounds fine," Jeremy said, obviously disinterested. Thomas. "Well, I'll go get your W." Thomas is interrupted by the ring of the elevator. Its doors disappeared into the walls. Hiley and Beck walked out. Beck's nervous expression told Jeremy she had received the same conversation. As Beck and Jeremy retreat into their apartment, Higley exclaims, "Hiley, y'all stay safe, we'll keep you folks updated." The door shut, bouncing those words back at the officers. Beck gazed at Jeremy with a slightly frightened tone. Beck. "Do you think Morgan's okay?" Jeremy. "Morgan, that motherfucker, he is the toughest geezer I know. I'm sure he is managing just fine. He probably just skipped town or something. We both know the police in this town have nothing to do. They are just overjoyed that they can question people." Jeremy didn't believe a single word that left his lips. Beck. "Well, yeah, I guess you're right," Beck said sheepishly. Jeremy. "As per usual. I know you didn't just marry me for my impossibly handsome face," Jeremy said smugly. Beck. "Oh, of course. We both know it wasn't for your wallet." Beck gestured to the open laptop on the sofa with a grin. Jeremy. "Fair," Jeremy said, defeated. Jeremy. "Can I make it up to you with a movie?" Beck raised her finger to her chin. Beck. I guess it'll do." Jeremy and Beck curl up on the couch together, drifting off to sleep there. Tap, tap, tap. Jeremy slowly begins to be ripped from his dream. Tap, tap, tap. Jeremy. "Beck?" Jeremy mutters. His eyes are split open by the night. It glared at him from outside the second-story window. Jeremy attempted to move or speak, but all was still. Unable to speak, he gripped Beck's arm tightly. Beck let out a short groan. Beck. "What?" she said, still in a trance. Sludge poured from the creature's mouth as it spoke. Haloperidol. "Sleep." The word wriggled into Jeremy's brain like an earthworm on a hot summer day. Jeremy, it's not dead, he said firmly as the entity slithered out of view below the window. Beck, yeah, sure. Beck, obviously still not aware of the situation, then drifted back to sleep. Jeremy spent the night staring at the window like it could jump to life at any moment. His bloodshot eyes begged him to blink. He refused. Beck's alarm began to blare. Jeremy didn't lose focus. Beck rolled off the couch with a thud. Jeremy hardly noticed. Beck. Fuck. Beck moaned as she snoozed her alarm. Beck started to gain her bearings as she stood up. Beck. Couldn't sleep. Jeremy raised his thumb to his mouth and slightly bit down. Jeremy? Yeah, something like that. Beck. Are you okay, hon? Jeremy, I'm fine, Jeremy said blankly. Beck began to get ready and shouted at him from their bedroom. Beck, are you sure you're all right? Jeremy, never better. Jeremy bit down harder on his thumb as he continued to stare lasers into the window. Beck entered the room. Beck, I'll be back early today. I hope you start feeling better. Beck rushed to the door. Jeremy. Yes, Jeremy stated. He could barely process the shutting of the door. As sleep began to wrap its tendrils around his head, he bit harder on his thumb. He could taste the blood from his thumb, yet the sleigh tug did not falter. The bone began to crack as his jaw tightened. He sat this way for many hours, thinking before writing another note. Note 3. It's back. It survived. I have to shoot it. Stabbing it in the jaw was no good. I'm so foolish. I'm sorry if my writing is not as legible as it normally is because my thumb is injured. It's back. It survived. I have to shoot it. Stabbing it in the jaw was no good. I'm so foolish. I'm sorry if my writing is not as legible as it normally is because my thumb is injured. It's back. It survived. I have to shoot it. Stabbing it in the jaw was no good. I'm so foolish. I'm sorry if my writing is not as legible as it normally is because my thumb is injured. It's back. It survived. I have to shoot it. Stabbing it in the jaw was no good. I'm so foolish. I'm sorry if my writing is not as legible as it normally is because my thumb is injured. It's back. It survived. I have to shoot it. Stabbing it in the jaw was no good. I'm so foolish. I'm sorry if my writing is not as legible as it normally is because my thumb is injured. I'll shoot it in the head. Love. Beck unlocks the door to 216 and gently shoves it open. Jeremy, before her, slumped on the ground asleep. Beck approaches. The mass on the floor. Beck, Jay, you okay? His eyelids stayed shut, but Beck could see his eyes rolling in their sockets. Jeremy groaned as Beck helped him to his feet. Jeremy. Awake, Jeremy muttered. Beck, let's get you to bed, hun. Jeremy's body felt lifeless as it fell to the bed. Sleep crept to him at last. Jeremy jolted awake in a frenzy. Sweat dripped from his brow, and he frantically looked around in the dead of night. The room was pitch black except for the dim light from the living room. While he attempted to get his wits about him, he saw something whisk past the door. A tall black figure. Jeremy grabbed the gun next to his nightstand and went for the door. Jeremy, Beck, where are you? He shouted. Jeremy turned the corner where the beast had gone and began to raise his gun. Beck, what the hell? Beck said, dropping the freshly dried clothes. He aimed the gun away from his wife. Jeremy, I thought I saw something. Beck's face melted. Slightly. Beck, you're not well, she said softly. Jeremy scrambled to explain. Jeremy. Well, Beck, please let me help you. I can't help you if you don't let me. Beck gently grabs his hand. Jeremy. Okay. Beck, let's get back to bed and talk about this after I work tomorrow. Jeremy. Okay. Beck led him to the bedroom, and they both returned to sleep. Jeremy slept most of the day, waking up around 3. He began to write all his thoughts down. They were practically illegible. After being in this state for several hours, he began to stare at the door to his apartment. Fear was eating him. He could hear the wet sound of something gasping on the other side of the door. Jeremy retreated to his room for a moment to retrieve his gun. The door then let out a slight knock. Jeremy, I know what you are. The knock bleeds into a pounding. The door's hinges scream, bending to the hits. Jeremy, leave me alone. Jeremy's hands tremble with the shotgun in his hands. The door is silent. Then a moment later, it gently swings open. The monster's mouth fell, gaped open as a droning pierced through the silence. SDFNDFIKYA. Jamiri. Jeremy. I'll fucking kill you. His trembling stops, his finger resting firmly on the trigger. It slowly trudged towards him. The entity's eyes slightly wet. Jeremy's finger forces the trigger down. Thomas. Friends is a fine show, but not even close to the brilliance of The Office. Higley glared back at him from the other side of the police cruiser. Higley. They can't even be compared. Completely. Different shows. The only similarity is that they are comedies. Thomas scrunches his face. Thomas. They are very similar. First of all, they are both sits. Thomas was cut off by the static of his radio as it came to life. A female voice jumped forth. Operator, Unit 7, do you read me? Thomas reaches down and lays his thumb on a button. Thomas. Officer Kench, we read you. Operator. There's been a report of a gunshot and screaming from the old apartment. Off Selter Street, room 216, the caller said. You two are the closest, but we are sending another car for backup. Can you guys check it out? Thomas. Yup. Heading that way. Thomas quickly pulled onto the road and sped to the apartment complex. Both officers entered the apartment. Thomas. Isn't 216 the couple with the funky last name? Higley looked up and thought for a little more than a moment. Higley. I think so. Higley stated unsure. They approached the door. Thomas. Police, open up, Thomas said, in a stern, loud voice as he knocked roughly on the door. No response. Thomas tried 2 more times, but nothing could be heard from the inside of the apartment. Thomas began to turn the handle of the old wooden door. Thomas, I'm coming in, he hollered. The old wooden door creaked open. Before the officers was the most gruesome thing they had seen in their combined 30 years of experience. Jeremy stood over his wife with a shotgun dangling on his side. She was on her knees with her head flowered open like a blooming rose. Blood and brain matter covered Jeremy and the surrounding furniture. The blood dripped down the chest of the woman, her body limp in my arms. My teeth released her neck, leaving behind 2 dots of red. I let her fall to the ground, her thick clothes muffling the thud. The life I had taken now reverberated within, my sterile veins. I had indulged my craving, drank it all up, and reveled in the power I held over the warm, delicate body. I breathed in the night-soaked air. I did not need the remnant of a lifelong need, yet it was a habit. I felt the liquid trickle from my mouth past my jaw, so I brushed it away with my thumb. The skin of my hand, alabaster both in color and feel, glittered in the moonlight. No, not like that twilight abomination of my kind I once caught a glimpse of in the cinema. The glitter was subtle, the kind of glitter a marble surface gives, off. The woman's body lay there, cold like the cobblestone underneath. She had already breathed her last breath. I could sense the death in her. She was no longer of use to me. I walked up the path to a suburban bungalow and rang the bell. A woman in her 30s answered the door, angry and disheveled in her nightgown. She rebuked me for coming in the night and demanded to know why I tore her out of sleep. I stretched, my lips into a smile, my fangs under the front door light. Let me in, I said, and my magic seeped into her. Her frown slackened, and she greeted me warmly, like an old friend, ushering me in. Once inside the ornate entrance hall, my eyes caught a mirror on the wall. It reflected my handsome face and neatly pulled back dark brown hair. I admired myself for a few seconds, for I remembered that I had forgotten to admire myself in my own mirror this morning. I ran a finger over my perfectly sculpted jaw and adjusted my black cloak on my shoulders. After I had become a vampire, I rid myself of all the imperfections that I had as a human. Gone was the unclean skin, the crooked nose, the wrinkles on my forehead. I was mesmerizing. The woman asked what I was doing, so I drew a fist through her skull, crafting a hole in it. I pulled my hand back and licked off the blood, and her body slumped to the ground. I then got on all fours and sank my teeth into her soft flesh. I gulped it all down wildly, For how unpleasantly she initially behaved, her taste was divine. Walked up the path to a small, decrepit yellow house and rang the bell. I had to ring 3 times to get the owner's attention. A drunk, middle-aged man leaned into the doorframe, a bottle in his hand. His eyes were squinted, and I wondered if he saw me as my menacing, elegantly styled self, or just a blurry figure. He cursed at me and asked what I wanted. "Let me in," I said, but did not smile. That cursing was uncalled for. His jaw went slack and his eyes relaxed as my power hit him. He finally shut his big mouth. He stepped aside and let me in. A woman, visibly the drunkard's lover, called out, "Who is that, darling?" and came stomping down the steps. She halted when she saw me. Her mascara was running down her cheeks, her lipstick smeared across her mouth, and she stood there, only in her lingerie against the frigid air wafting in from the door. I smiled, drunken with desire. I left the man standing there aside and walked towards the fair lady. I enchanted her with my magic and pulled her to my chest. Her blood burned on my tongue, a sweet, sweet spice. She was clearly drunk too. I drained her dry and savored her. Lips so plump, moist, and tender. Tender just like hers when we kissed too much. I let go of the woman's body and turned to the limp drunk man. I pierced his mushy neck laden with bruises and liquids of piss and vomit. The taste was unpleasant, but I bore it in favor of what was to come. Once the thick, sweet blood overflowed my mouth and spilled over the man's chest, I moaned with pleasure and glee. Soon the man was drained to death and I had nothing more to suck. I was outside the house before the man's body hit the ground. I walked up the path to a large mansion, not much smaller than my own, and rang the bell. I heard a voice inside, call for Mandy to go open the door. Mandy did as she was told, and I was standing face to face with a crossed teenage girl. She asked what I wanted, or rather spat it out. I disliked her attitude. Let me in. My magic engulfed her, and soon she was smiling at me and singing praises of my grandeur as she invited me to the fancy entrance hall of her family palace. Her parents were in the living room, and a younger boy, most likely her brother, was sitting at the nearby kitchen table. A baby wriggled in the father's arms, and the mother had a rattle toy in her hand. I let my claws appear and sliced a line through Mandy's neck. Her head fell off and left her body standing upright, like the horseman. From the legend of Sleepy Hollow. Oh my God! The mother wailed in terror. The father's face lost all color. He handed the baby to the mother and stood up shakily. He stared all his sorrow into my soul. I read his mind and learned that he was going to run to the drawer and pull out his gun. Except he was not going to do that, for my magic had him frozen to the spot. The same fate met the mother and the son. I even decided to paralyze the baby. Terror was enticing, but I hated that it always came with screaming. I despised the sound. This way, I could revel in their fearful faces and not suffer the blast of their vocal range. I drained Mandy first, which proved to be a quick and easy feat given her lack of a head. Then I drained the father and the mother, both bland and unimpressive. They must have been that way in life. I then walked up to the son and looked at his curly brown hair and freckles. A flash of similar, but ginger hair and a freckled face went through my mind, and I staggered backwards with a gasp. I regained my composure, closed my eyes, and sank my teeth into the boy's flesh. It was delicate and smelled of dirt and trees. He must have been climbing them. The ginger boy was in my mind again, climbing up a tree too tall and wide. I heard my own voice shouting at him softly, "Careful, Denny, you may fall." I reached out my hand after him, prepared to catch him in case he fell. I jerked back and almost puked up the blood I had drunk. Thankfully, no such thing happened. Such bodily functions did not happen to me anymore. Thank fuck. I killed the boy with my power, silently, simply by stopping his heart, and went to the living room, where the toddler lay in its dead mother's arms. Its skin was smooth and pale, like a porcelain doll. I assumed it was a girl, based on the tiny pink dress and pink bow in her barely there hair. I pushed back against my hesitation and bit into her collarbone. Horrid mistake. I saw her on the ground, wailing and stretching her small hands out toward me. I was splayed out on the ground, the cool tiles pressing against my cheek. I stretched my hand toward her, but I was too weak to even shout her name. But I thought, Evangeline, Evangeline, please don't hurt Evangeline. But he did not care. Even if he heard the pleas in my head, he did not care. He was there at the door, with his long cape glistening in the dim light of the corridor lamps. And then, in a sharp flick, he was not at the door but at the crib, bending down to pick up Evangeline. He tore off her limbs as I watched and cried, unable to move. He then lay down next to me and drained me of all my blood, cackling at my sobs, and chokes whispering, her young blood was the sweetest. I spat out all the blood and was stuck coughing and spluttering. I felt like forever had passed before I got up off the ground and wiped my mouth. My magic squeezed the baby's heart, but I vanished from the living room before it pumped the last gush. I pondered what happened to me. In the past, I got flashes of memories of her, Cecile, whenever I drank the blood of a young blonde woman, so I stopped feeding on those. Then last month, the alcoholic's lover's lips reminded me of her again. So I resolved to quit drinking from plump-lipped young women. I even considered leaving out all women and only feeding on men, could a memory of her come to me again. And this night, I realized, was different. I made a unique choice. The reason I saw them, Denny and Evangeline tonight, was that this was the first time I drank from children. I decided to never do so again. The memories were too distracting. I walked up the path to a small, isolated farmhouse and rang the bell. An older man cracked the door open and peeked at me. I smiled, well past the capacity of a mere human's face. "Let me in," I said, and wanted to send my magic at him, but then I sensed it. I wanted to slap myself with both hands. This matter should have come up beforehand. I should have ascertained he was susceptible before I even stepped foot on this farm. The farmer smiled, and I hated to read mockery in it. "You must be on the prowl," he said. I said nothing. What should I have even said? But he continued, "I know what you are. I've met the likes of you before. Most of them tried the same trick. It never worked on me." The farmer let the door widen and leaned against the door frame, too comfortable for my comfort. "I guess you'll kill me now. Suck out my blood, torture me, whatever. Might as well be you. Heck, I'm going to die soon anyway." "What do you mean?" I snarled. "What do you mean you're going to die soon?" Was he ill? I loathed the taste of sickness. I employed my power to sense him, and it confirmed to me that this man was riddled with the most despicable of diseases. "Cancer?" I asked in annoyance. The old farmer took a drag from a cigar I had not even noticed he was holding and nodded. "Yup, the fast ticket out," I snarled in rage. "I wasted my time for nothing," the farmer spoke on. "But you don't have to do this." He gestured vaguely with his hand in the air. "The whole beast thing. I haven't only met vampires like you. I've also met some great ones. They were normal. No snarling, murderous bullshit. They behaved humanely, only they were above the dread of life because they had little to lose. Certainly not their lives if they weren't outright running to the sun." I snarled again, to spite him. "What do you know about my kind?" I bellowed, but the man was still not intimidated. He snorted a laugh and said, "More than you'd think. For one, I know you fuckers don't actually need to drain people till they shrivel up like old paper. 1 drop of blood is enough to sustain you for a month. You don't need to kill people to survive. So why did you decide to go down that path?" If I hadn't remembered the farmer was ill, I would have blasted his head off and drunk up from his neck. But I managed to compose my voice into calmness and said, "What are you saying, mortal? 1 drop of blood. Are you insane? This is precisely what vampires do. We are creatures of the night, feasting upon the blood of you mortals without pity. We must drain you all to survive." I could not believe this man was questioning the way of my kin. This way of life was natural for us. All the legends said so. We vampires had to kill to survive, and so our nature made us ruthless killers. He certainly was that way. He batted no eye at my misery. It was definitely his nature. Why else would he do such a horrible thing to me? He did not have a choice. The vampiric curse took over his mind. He was doing what he was meant to do, and I was doing the same. The farmer laughed again. If you don't believe me, try it. Try only drinking a drop of blood and sparing the person. You'll see that you'll be fine. He took a drag out of the cigar. They got you young, huh? I mean, not that it matters. You vampires can change appearance at will. I felt anger boil my non-existent blood. What foolish things you are suggesting. And to dabble in my past. I shall slice your throat at once. But I could not stop the memories from resurfacing. I saw them dead on the floor, Cecile's blonde hair soaked in blood, Evangeline's lifeless torso. I saw myself at the table, wondering why I was still seeing, breathing, and walking, wondering why they all died but me. Yeah, slice my throat, sink your teeth into it, hiss while you're doing it. All that shit. The farmer mumbled amusedly. I just want you to remember, this whole scary Victorian era shtick is completely unnecessary. No, quite the opposite. It is completely necessary, I said. You don't know a thing. You think that just because you have learned a few facts about vampires, you now have the upper hand. What a moron you are. Most things you said were untrue. And it is in fact such a simple thing. If only you listened to the tales of our kind and were vigilant. The fairy tales are bullshit, the farmer said and blew out the cigar smoke. Of all the vampires I have met, you are the only one acting like Stoker's Dracula. Well, then you have either met some charlatans pretending to be vampires, I said, or you have met none at all and you have just made it all up. I had to admit the farmer did get some things right about vampires, such as our aversion to the sun or the fact that we could shapeshift. But those were only common knowledge, or he could have been lucky with his guess. If only I could read his mind. But with these unsusceptible ones, that was impossible. And have you ever met other vampires? The farmer asked. A fiery feeling shot through me once more. I was utterly crossed. This man had absolutely no humility. Well, come to think of it, I have only met one vampire, the one that changed me and took my family. And there lay my answer. He was exactly like me and I was exactly like him. I needed no other vampires. I was fine on my own. The farmer had to see my hesitation, and he laughed again. You haven't, am I right? At least not the kind I have met. You know, the ones that don't conform to the stereotypes. He took a drag out of that disgusting cigar. He then said, I might not be a vampire, young lad, but I can sense some things about you. A shiver passed down my back. He sensed things about me. This man was fucking creepy. But he was not a magical being, I would have sensed that. And to call me a young lad, as if I were a pubescent boy, a human boy. This man was insufferable. I managed to compose myself and said, Then let's see how you can sense me with your nose shoved up your arse. The farmer cackled and then scrunched up his brows. Geez, something must have really messed you. Huh? I breathed in the air of spite and let it out through my nose. Nothing has messed me up at all. I have simply become a vampire and left all my pathetic human habits in the past. The farmer smirked. And yet you still breathe the air you do not need. I wanted to threaten him with death again, but then I remembered he was indifferent to it. I breathed angrily in and out of my nose, making sure to look terribly menacing with my scowl. I had to look menacing. Vampires were always menacing. I can see your grief, lad, the farmer said, his tone somewhat warmer. My scowl deepened, and I said, Stop acting like a fool and trying to guess things about my life. You are a mere human. You cannot read my mind nor my past. I, on the other hand, can read anything about you. I was lying. Once more, those like him were unreadable. I had come across a human man like this farmer in the past, and I had asked my magic why he was that way. My power had told me that he had a potential for magic, that he could turn into a magical being, including a vampire. I have not really remembered the entire hierarchy of magical beings or the methods of magical activation, for I was not interested in turning anyone. I pondered why the farmer hadn't asked one of the vampires he had allegedly met to turn him. I wondered if they even told him about his potential. Not that it mattered, for again, I had no intention of turning this creepy old man into a vampire. Who knows what absurdities he would do then with that power. Just like I had done with the man in the past, this farmer's fate was sealed. The farmer scoffed, put a cigar in between his chapped old lips and said, "So please read me." He gestured to himself. "You're not worth my time," I said. "There is surely nothing interesting about you. You are just a farmer, a human farmer. I only bother to read lives that promise thrill. Yours promises the dullness of the sky above." The sky was a dull, dark blue tonight, with barely any stars, as dull as the farmer's clothes and complexion. He smirked again. I loathed that smirk of his. It always revealed his 3 missing teeth and the rotting rest. "I'm not going to argue against that," he said, and blew out smoke. "So, Mr. Vampire, since you have decided to be the stereotypical bogeyman from the fairy tales, are you going to suck me dry and leave me at the doorstep for my neighbor to hopefully find my body one day?" "No," I said. "You reek of illness. You reek of humanity." "Gee whiz, I haven't noticed." The farmer snorted. "That cigar in his mouth again." I frowned. "No, I didn't say I wasn't going to kill you. I will simply not suck your blood. It's infested with that cancer of yours." The farmer cackled again and said, "Well, you may do as you please. You are, after all, so much more powerful than me, right?" He took the horrid cigar out of his mouth and reached with his other hand inside the neckline of his shirt. "But since you are a vampire, Mr. Vampire..." He pulled out the embellishment of his necklace I had not even noticed was hidden in his shirt. "You're afraid of this, right?" He showed me the pendant, and I hissed and jumped a few steps back when I noticed it was a cross. The farmer laughed a full belly laugh, and I hissed again. That disrespectful, cocky idiot. He then tilted his head and said, "But why are you afraid of it?" Well, what the fuck did he think? Because it hurt us, it stung and burned us to look at it, and then I realized that I have never been hurt by a cross. I have always just run away upon seeing one. But if I were to come close to it or touch it, I was certain I would get burned. All the legends said so. "It doesn't really hurt you," the farmer said. "You're just tricking yourself into it." He tapped a finger at his temple. "I know. Those other vampires told me." He smiled with his mouth open, and again there were those horrid teeth. My insides were boiling with anger, yearning to be unbound, to be unleashed upon this pitiful creature of a man. The farmer motioned with his hand towards himself. "Come on, come back close again. This won't hurt you, it's just a pendant. Why? Is a powerful vampire such as yourself afraid of a little old cross?" He was mocking my way of speech now, I saw. I growled and bared my teeth, and in a gust of wind that swept up fallen leaves from the ground, I was before him again. My claws slashed through his neck. His head landed on the ground and did a few soggy flips in a pool of blood. It remained lying face up, with that despicable, revolting, open smile of the farmer carved into his face. I did not want my victim to die with a smile. I wanted all of them to be pale with terror at the sight of me before their last breath puffs. I ordered my magic to twist the corners of the farmer's lips down and to ascend his brows. Now the face no longer bore signs of merriness, only fear. The moonlight gave the cross on his chest a faint glimmer. His body lay right at my feet, and yet I did not feel any pain. It must have functioned only upon direct contact then. As I had read in the legends, many hunters burned vampires by touching their skin with their wooden crosses. Or perhaps that was the issue. This cross was not made out of wood. It looked metallic. I reached out my hand to touch it, to see if it would burn me. But only an inch away from the cross, I retracted my hand and growled. It was not worth it. Why would I want to get burned? My loss of the sensation of pain and pressure that came with vampirism had been a blessing after all. What was I thinking? Descending to such masochistic measures. It was truly him, the farmer. He had muddied my head with his devilishness. With a final repulsed snarl over his illness-riddled body, I turned around, called upon my bat wings, and soared towards the silent sky in search of a mortal who was going to let me in. Mike and his mother Sarah lived in a sharply white two-story house about 8 miles from the city and half a mile away from a red diner that worked throughout the week and the weekend. The house was adjacent to nothing else but the road and the forest. Mike was homeschooled and 16 years of age, and his mother worked as a teacher in the city. She would wake up at about 6 o'clock in the morning and start up the blue Jeep, which was parked by the house, at around 7 o'clock in the morning and go to the city. She would usually come back home at around 7:30 in the evening. It was winter, and Mike was feeling insecure staying alone at home. The house had a tall, big attic that neither Mike nor his mom ever visited, because the way it was built gave off a frightening vibe. Something within the position of the bricks and the whiteness continuing on upward and upward could frighten anybody. Was it the sway of shadows the attic cast upon the staircase? Was it the oldness and barrenness its walls gave out? Well, it was perhaps the combination of many things, but they never went into the attic themselves. When he would sleep, Mike would get nightmares. When he was awake throughout the day learning, watching TV, or playing video games, he would feel watched. Sometimes food would disappear from the fridge, and the drapes in the upper rooms would move on their own. Sometimes when he was alone, he would feel the whiteness of the walls and almost hear whispers coming out of them. It was frightening. So frightening being alone hour upon hour in the winter and knowing you could not leave the house and go anywhere. One day, Mike was on the lower floor watching TV when he heard the opening of a door. A chill ran through his spine and he felt coldness. He quickly picked up his mobile phone and stared at its screen. Then he heard a footstep, and looking backward, he could see a shadow peering in through the upper sections of the staircase. He quickly shot up and walked to the front door. It was cold, and his hands were trembling. He put on a jacket summarily and exited the house. Just as he did so, he glanced at the window and saw a figure walking along the staircase from inside the house. He ran away in a swift manner, and because he didn't have the keys to the gate, he climbed on top of the fence and jumped, falling on the opposite side and leaving the perimeter of the the garden. He looked toward the window of the house again and saw Nopian Eula's staircase. However, just at that moment, he saw that the curtains moved on their own up in the attic. Fear gripped him like never before. He was frightened to his core. The slow movement of the curtains felt like the dingiest scene of a blackened nightmare. He was so alone. He quickly dialed his mother's phone number, but she wouldn't pick up. He didn't know what to do. He knew one thing. He couldn't go back to the house. So he started walking down the snowy road toward the diner. It took about 15 minutes. He entered shivering and frightened. A deep scowl was upon his face and his ettenkeys were moving swiftly. He felt cold and alone and frightened. "There's a man in my house," he told the lady behind the counter. "A man in your house?" She answered aptly. Hettinkey moved on the stairway and then tugged at the curtains in the attic. Fuck, Mike said. "Well, we better call the police then. It's good you came here, it's good you ran away." Mike thought for a moment and indeed decided to call the police. He dialed 911 and waited and then told the dispatcher everything. A single police car. Took more than an hour to arrive. 2 policemen exited swiftly and entered the property. They entered the door of the house, guns drawn. Then they went up the staircase. One opened the door to the attic. Immediately, a pale man wearing a gray shirt jumped out with a blade. He slashed at the officer's neck, and before the other policeman was able to shoot, he stabbed him in the chest. Then he ran quickly down the staircase and exited the house. The second policeman survived and was able to call for backup. The officers that came found nobody on the property. However, up in the attic they found different types of blades, and food stored in a drawer, and disheveled clothes upon a makeshift bed. They also found a notebook. An excerpt of what was written in it proves as follows: "I will kill them. I will make them fear me." The boy would be seeing shadows. He would be alone at home all day. And the shadows would frighten him. Frighten him good. He would be afraid to come up here in the attic. And when his mother comes back, he will feel better. And they would all go to sleep. Go to sleep. That's when I would come in. I would come in. With the somberness of shadows and the movement of drapes and little sounds, I would enter each of their bedrooms, and they would find out their worst nightmare in the dead of night. Almost soundless, almost invisible, yet palpable and forever there. So it went, continuously with page after page. When Mike and his mother Sarah found out about everything that evening, they decided they would stay no longer in the house but rent a small apartment in the city. Everything was good for about a month and a half. Mike felt comfortable staying alone in the apartment, and his mother felt comfortable knowing he was all right. She would come in the evening, and they would eat spaghetti or pizza for dinner and afterward go to sleep. However, starting a few days ago in the middle of the night, light knocks could be heard on the outside door. It was a heavy metal door, but it was frightening to hear the thuds nevertheless. Mike heard them a few nights while he was dazed and going to the bathroom. He thought nothing of them in his sleepy state, but he and his mother shortly began having nightmares. And once, in the dead of night, as Mike heard the light knocks on the door and made his way to it and peered through the peephole, he could see shadows moving and an eerie silhouette standing there, coated in darkness, knocking almost silently on the door. It's funny how the silence of a park at night can feel like both a sanctuary and a prison. For me, it had always been the former. I'd sit for hours on a worn-out bench under the skeletal branches of an old oak tree, the frigid winter air biting at my cheeks and seeping through my threadbare coat. It didn't matter. I needed that solitude, needed to escape the constant hurricane of thoughts in my head. The park was the one place where the world didn't demand anything from me. It just let me exist, but not tonight. "Hey, the park's closed." The night guard's voice cut through the silence like a jagged knife. I'd seen him a few times before, a sturdy man with a flashlight that seemed unnecessarily bright. He'd never spoken to me until now. I looked up, startled, my breath puffing out in white clouds. "Sorry," I mumbled, pulling myself off the bench. "You can't be hanging around here at night," he said, his tone more evil than hostile. "You're not supposed to be here." I've never thought that his voice was like that. He didn't wait for my response. He just stood there, his flashlight casting long, eerie shadows across the frozen ground until I shuffled away. I stuffed my hands deep into my pockets and started the long walk back home. I felt displeased. My apartment wasn't far, but it felt miles away on a night like this. The cold was sharper now, like needles pricking every inch of exposed skin. I kept my head down and my thoughts inward, the crunch of snow underfoot the only sound accompanying me. At first, I didn't notice anything unusual. The streets were as they always were, dimly lit and deserted, the occasional car passing by with headlights that briefly illuminated the frost-covered world. But then, the air seemed to shift. It wasn't just colder, it was heavy, oppressive, like the atmosphere itself had grown denser. The shadows cast by street lamps stretched unnaturally long, their shapes twisting and writhing as if alive. I tried to shake it off, chalking it up to exhaustion and my overactive imagination. I quickened my pace, eager to get back to the safety of my apartment. But the path ahead seemed different. The familiar landmarks were gone, replaced by unfamiliar streets that seemed to curve and twist in impossible ways. I started to panic as I realized I was lost. The night felt alive. The trees lining the road, barren and leafless in winter, seemed to lean closer, their branches clawing at the air like skeletal fingers. I could hear faint whispers just at the edge of perception. They weren't words exactly, but soft, dark whispers in my head that made my skin crawl. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. The only response was the whispering, growing louder now. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. My breath quickened, and I broke into a run, desperate to find something familiar, something real. The snow beneath my feet felt different, softer, almost spongy. Looking down, I saw that it wasn't snow at all. It was gray, shifting, like ash or fine dust. My footsteps left blackened marks, and the air began to smell acrid, like burnt wood. "What is this?" I whispered to myself. my voice barely audible over the growing cacophony of whispers. The landscape around me was no longer recognizable. The buildings were warped, their windows like gaping mouths frozen in silent screams. The streetlights flickered erratically, casting sickly yellow light that seemed to pulse in time with my racing heart. I stumbled and fell, my hand sinking into the ashen ground. It felt warm to the touch, like something smoldering just beneath the surface. I scrambled to my feet, my eyes darting around for any sign of normalcy. That's when I saw it, a figure standing in the distance, shrouded in shadow. At first, I thought it was the night guard, but this figure was taller, impossibly so. Its limbs were elongated, stretching unnaturally, and its head tilted at an inhuman angle. "Hey, can you help me?" I shouted, though every fiber of my being screamed at me to run the other way. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, motionless, watching me. I couldn't see its face, if it even had one, but I felt its gaze piercing through me, cold and unrelenting. The whispers grew louder, more distinct now. They were chanting, repeating a single phrase over and over. I couldn't make out the words, but their rhythm was hypnotic, pulling me closer to the figure despite my fear. I took a step forward, then another, as if drawn by some invisible force. The ground beneath me cracked and splintered with each step, revealing a fiery glow that pulsed like a heartbeat. The figure raised one long, spindly arm and pointed directly at me. The whispers stopped abruptly, replaced by a deafening silence that pressed against my eardrums. "What do you want?" I managed to choke out, my voice barely more than a whimper. The figure tilted its head further, its body contorting in ways that defied logic, and then it spoke. Its voice was not a single voice, but a chorus of many, overlapping and discordant. "You do not belong here." The ground gave way beneath me, and I fell. The world around me dissolved into darkness, and I was plunged into an abyss. My body felt weightless, my screams swallowed by the void. Images flashed before my eyes. The park bench, the night guard, the twisting streets, and then faces. Hundreds of them, their eyes hollow and mouths open in silent agony. I landed hard on a cold, metallic surface. The impact knocked the wind out of me, and I lay there, gasping for air. When I finally managed to sit up, I found myself in a room. The walls were lined with mirrors, each one reflecting not my image but a distorted version of it. My reflection smiled at me, its eyes black voids that oozed darkness. "What is this?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "You wanted to be alone," the reflections said in unison, their voices mocking. "Now you are." I tried to move, but my limbs felt heavy, as if the air itself was pressing down on me. The reflections began to move independently, their movements jerky and unnatural. They stepped out of the mirrors, surrounding me. I screamed, but no sound came out. One of them reached out, its hand cold and clammy against my skin. Goodbye. I remember the day I found it as if it were yesterday. The late afternoon sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the flea market on the outskirts of our quaint little town. It was the kind of day where everything seemed still, the heat lingering, pressing down on everything. The dry, hot breeze stirred the dust, kicking up tiny whirlwinds as I walked through the narrow aisles with my dog Charlie, scanning the rows of vendors with growing frustration. The farm wasn't doing well this season. Pests, birds, and rodents were tearing through the crops with an almost savage determination. Clara and I had tried everything, scare tactics, traps, sprays, but nothing seemed to keep them away. It was as if the very land itself was rebelling against us. Sometimes I wonder if this was an act of sabotage by Mr. Monroe, who had been greedily eyeing my land for a while now. But no matter the cause, the outcome was the same. The crops were wilting, the soil dry despite the endless hours. I'd spent watering them, and every morning brought more damage, more destruction. The farm was struggling, and so were we. We weren't just facing financial ruin. This was ancestral land, passed down through 7 generations. Losing it would mean losing a piece of ourselves. Clara's patience was wearing thin, though she never showed it. But I saw it in the way she pressed her lips together when the kids weren't looking, or the tightness in her shoulders when we sat down at the kitchen table to try and budget for the week. We couldn't afford another bad season. The stress was eating at both of us, turning our once lively dinner table conversations into tense silences. I was desperate, grasping at straws, literally, trying to find something, anything that might help. I figured maybe this flea market would have something useful, though I didn't know what exactly I was looking for. That's when I saw it. Tucked between a pile of rusted tools, frayed ropes, and battered knickknacks was a scarecrow. It was old, worn out and tattered. The kind of thing that had been through too many summers and winters, far more than it should have survived. Its burlap face was faded, sun-bleached, and split in places, the frayed edges fluttering in the wind like dead, skin peeling from an old wound. Its clothes, a pair of ripped overalls and a threadbare flannel shirt, hung limp from its crooked frame, remnants of an era long forgotten. Despite its ragged appearance, something about it drew me in, and I couldn't look away. Maybe it was the unnatural way it stood out among the clutter, or maybe it was the way the light seemed to dim around it when I looked at it. I couldn't shake the feeling it was watching me, as if its dark, hollow eyes were tracking my every move. And the crooked smile stretched unnaturally wide, almost up to its ears, as though it knew a secret I didn't. The scarecrow seemed to catch Charlie's fancy too. He sniffed it cautiously before placing his paw on it, almost as if testing whether it was real. I snapped out of my thoughts when a man's voice suddenly cut through the eerie silence. It was the owner. He was a small, hunched figure standing behind the stall, half hidden in the shadows beneath a wide-brimmed hat. His leathery skin, deeply lined with wrinkles, hinted at a long, hard life. His face remained mostly obscured, his eyes concealed in the shadow of the hat, making it impossible to guess his age. An instinctual urge told me to turn away. Both the scarecrow and the man unsettled me in ways I couldn't explain. "You're looking for something to keep the birds away, aren't you?" he said without glancing up, his voice gravelly and dry. There was an accent too, faint but old-fashioned, as though it belonged to another era. I blinked, startled by his accuracy. How could he know? I thought to myself. I nodded slowly, unsure of what to say, my mouth suddenly dry. Then he looked up, meeting my gaze for a fleeting moment. "This here'll do the trick," he said, gesturing toward the scarecrow with a bony finger. "No birds, no rodents, no pests. You'll see." I hesitated, taking a closer look at the scarecrow. It looked as if it would fall apart if I so much as touched it. The wind tugged at its loose stitches, making them sway slightly, and I noticed a faint odor, musty, like damp earth mixed with decay. "Does it work?" I asked, my voice filled with skepticism. I didn't want to come off as too desperate, but I was. The man grinned, revealing a set of yellowed, uneven teeth. "It works," he said with an air of certainty that felt unsettling. "Better than you think. Just set it up in your field. It'll do the rest." My gut twisted with unease, and despite the creeping dread, I handed over the little cash I had left. The man took it without another word. I heaved the scarecrow into the bed of my truck, its hollow, straw-filled body thudding against the metal, as I started my drive back to the farm. When I got home, the sun was setting, casting an orange hue across the farm. I glanced toward the house where the warm light of the kitchen spilled through the windows. Clara was inside, cooking dinner. While the kids helped her set the table, the smell of roasting chicken wafted into the air. Charlie and I were immediately greeted by Sir Sunrise, a rooster, who quietly came and perched himself on the back of the truck as I parked near the front porch. He observed in silence as I unloaded the scarecrow. Sir Sunrise earned his name from my 8-year-old son, Luke, thanks to his remarkable habit of crowing at exactly 6 a.m. every morning. It didn't matter if it was pouring rain, the middle of winter, or a cloudy morning when the sun didn't show. He always knew when it was time. He'd march up and down the porch, his triumphant cock-a-doodle-doo echoing for a full minute, ensuring the entire Smith household woke to his call. Oddly enough, that was the only time he ever crowed, even though he spent the rest of the day busily wandering the farm. Even stranger was the quiet, almost unspoken friendship he shared with Charlie. The two seemed to enjoy each other's company in a way that always surprised me. I hoisted the scarecrow onto my shoulders and made my way toward the field. The crops swayed in the soft evening breeze, rows of corn and wheat stretching out before me like sentinels. I chose a spot right in the middle, far enough from the house but close enough that I could still watch it from the upstairs window. I attached the scarecrow to a wooden pole that was already planted deep in the soil. It stood crooked and eerie, its burlap face staring blankly at the sky. Sir Sunrise inaugurated the new addition in the field by performing a couple of customary laps around the pole before taking off, with Charlie eagerly chasing after him. My eyes, however, drifted toward Mr. Monroe's factory in the distance. For years, he had been acquiring land from my neighbors and was determined to buy my property as well. He wasn't pleased when I turned him down. Ever since then, my farm has suffered. My crops have been constantly under attack, making me wonder if he was in any way involved. But without proof, all I could do was continue my work and hope things would eventually turn around. I took one last look at the scarecrow before walking back home to join my wife and kids for dinner. That night, sleep didn't come easily. I tossed and turned, my mind replaying the image of the scarecrow in the field, motionless, seemingly unthreatening, yet somehow menacing. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that stitched smile, wide and knowing, as though it was waiting for something. Was I expecting some sort of miracle from it? Is that why I felt this knot in my stomach? Because deep down, I knew I was acting out of desperation and not thinking rationally. The wind howled outside, rattling the shutters, but beyond that, there was silence. No crows cawing, no rustling in the crops, just an unsettling, unnatural silence. Meanwhile, Clara slept soundly beside me. I noticed the cut above her eyebrow even in the pale moonlight, a scar from her youth. Despite her challenging childhood, she had a gift for finding peace in chaos, while I remained a light sleeper, needing exhaustion to fall into a deep slumber. I rolled over, pulling the blanket tighter around me, and eventually drifted to sleep. When morning finally came, I stepped outside, half expecting to find the fields torn apart like before. But they were untouched. Not a single stalk was damaged. I looked toward the scarecrow still standing in the same spot and felt a wave of relief wash over me. Maybe the old peddler was right. Maybe it really was that effective. A couple more days went by, and the crops remained unharmed. Not a single bird or rodent dared to come near them. For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope, a lightness in my chest that I hadn't felt in ages. I didn't fully understand how a scarecrow could make such a difference. The results defied logic, but I wasn't about to question it now. Clara noticed the shift in my mood too and began to believe again herself. She watched our children, Emma and Luke, play among the crops, their laughter ringing through the air like music after a long silence. It was as if the scarecrow had brought back more than just safety for the crops. It had brought back hope. But on the fourth night, things began to take a strange turn. I woke up in the dead of night to the sound of Sir Sunrise crowing, loud, persistent, and completely out of character. He was never one to crow at night. His routine was always the same, like clockwork at 6 a.m. My body, heavy with sleep, resisted the urge to get up. I waited, hoping he'd stop, but Sir Sunrise kept going, his calls growing louder, more driven. With a groan, I dragged myself out of bed and stumbled toward the window, expecting to see him perched where he usually roosted. But instead, Sir Sunrise was on the front porch, pacing back and forth, his head bobbing furiously, crowing as if the morning sun was already shining. But the thing that made my stomach lurch wasn't him. It was the moon. It hung in the sky, casting a pale glow over the fields. The crop swayed gently in the breeze, bathed in a strange coppery light. It was only then that I realized it wasn't just any moon. It was a total lunar eclipse. The blood moon hung above, eerie and red, painting the field in a haunting glow. But what I saw next stopped me cold. The scarecrow, It wasn't where I had left it. For a moment, I just stood there blinking, my tired mind scrambling to make sense of what I was seeing. I rubbed my eyes, squinted, and even stepped closer to the window. But no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, there it was, standing at the far end of the field, a place I had never placed it. My heart pounded in my chest. Who could have moved it? And why? Was it some prank? But who would come all the way out here in the middle of the night just for that? My thoughts raced, reaching for logical explanations that didn't quite add up. Maybe it was just my groggy, sleep-deprived brain playing tricks on me. The moonlight, the shadows. It could have easily created an illusion. Or maybe it was the wind somehow shifting the scarecrow's position. Scarecrows were light, after all. It could have been anything. Right? I shook my head, telling myself, it didn't matter. I could fix it in the morning. Still unsettled, I forced myself back to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. My dreams were strange, fragmented, filled with shadowy figures moving through the fields. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, I got out of bed, hoping to shake off the strange feeling from the night before. To my relief, when I looked out the window, the scarecrow was back in its original spot. I sighed, feeling a wave of calm wash over me, but only for a fleeting moment, because when my gaze swept across the field, something caught my eye, and it made my stomach drop. A flock of crows was circling low over a patch of land near the edge of the field, the very spot where I had seen the scarecrow standing the night before. I felt a chill crawl down my spine. This was never going to be good news. Without hesitation, I bolted out of the house and raced toward the spot where the birds hovered, their dark wings cutting through the sky like a bad omen. The birds flew away when I reached the area. But what I saw made me momentarily speechless. Scattered among the crops were dead animals. Birds, rodents, frogs, and other small creatures. They weren't just randomly lying there either. Their bodies were arranged in peculiar, almost ritualistic patterns. Circles, spirals, rows, shapes that made my skin crawl. And the worst part? Straw. Pieces of straw, like the kind stuffed inside the scarecrow, were strewn around the animals, as if linking them to the figure that now loomed in the field. I knelt, down, my fingers brushing over the straw. At first I wanted to believe it was a predator, some animal playing tricks, a fox or wild dog arranging its kills. But that thought quickly crumbled. The arrangement of the bodies was too precise, too deliberate. It felt wrong. Could this be Mr. Monroe's doing? Another twisted attempt by him to sabotage my farm. Before I could even finish the thought, Clara's voice echoed across the field, her tone sounding nervous and urgent. I looked up and saw her in the distance, standing on the front porch, her posture tense as though trying to intervene before something happened. But the thick rows of crops blocked my view, making it impossible to see what had her so panicked. I set off again, this time heading back, toward the entrance of my own house. As I got closer, the menacing growl of Charlie pierced the air. When I pushed through the last of the crops, I saw him engaged in a tense standoff, his fur matted and streaked with blood, growling fiercely at Sir Sunrise. The rooster was badly injured, his feathers in disarray and blood dripping onto the ground. He wobbled, struggling to stay upright, yet remained defiant, determined to hold his ground in the fight. But Charlie wasn't finished. Before I could intervene, he lunged at the rooster, clamping down on his throat with his teeth. With a violent shake of his head, I heard the sickening snap of bone. Charlie finally released him, and the lifeless body dropped to the ground. Horror washed over me as blood pooled around the carcass. Charlie cleared his throat a couple of times, and in slow motion, I saw him extend his tongue, licking the blood clean off the floor in one swift motion. I stood frozen, unable to look away as Charlie, his tongue stained with blood and dirt, jerked and crouched momentarily, eyes closed, tilting his head down before releasing a loud howl, with his muzzle pointed skyward. He then darted off into the field before I could pin him down. I chased after him, but it was clear he wasn't interested in being found. I expected he would eventually find his way back home. though I wasn't sure what I would do with him upon his return. I had never seen him behave this way before. I struggled to piece together the events of the morning, wondering if there could be any correlation to last night. Deep down, I couldn't ignore the gnawing suspicion forming in my gut. This all began the moment I brought that scarecrow home. What had been a curious purchase at a roadside stand had now morphed into a source of growing dread, its tendrils curling tighter around my mind. And what about the dead animals? Were they also Charlie's doing? I had no clear answers, and I reluctantly glanced at the scarecrow perfectly positioned in the middle of the field. The smile stretching across its face stirred an uneasy feeling in me. That is strike one. Patrick, a voice echoed in my head at that very moment. And for the first time, I considered getting rid of it. But as I looked at the crops around me, I was quietly taken aback by the risks I was willing to accept. Finally gathering my composure, I dealt with the dead animals, burying them one by one in haste before Clara could notice. She was already upset about Sir Sunrise and had spent the day looking for Charlie, convinced they had a falling out. Her suspicions were not yet on the scarecrow, and I hoped to keep it that way. Still, I forced myself to focus on the positives. The crops were thriving, better than ever in fact. The rows were thick with green, healthy stalks, and the vegetables were coming in larger than expected. My family was on track to recoup our losses, and hopefully that would put us in a better financial position than we had been in for years. But that night, as the wind whistled through the trees and rustled the leaves, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Something was out there watching us. The scarecrow was more than just straw and cloth, and I could feel that deep in my bones. I pressed the pillow to my ears, desperate to drown out the sounds of the night and drift off to sleep. But then a loud, piercing howl shattered the stillness. It was Charlie, no doubt, somewhere out in the field in the distance, howling into the night. Somehow I eventually succumbed to exhaustion and drifted off to sleep. But I was jolted awake by my daughter Emma's urgent voice calling for me. "Dad, come quick!" Her frantic tone sliced through the morning calm like a knife, pulling me from my dreams. Heart racing, I scrambled out of bed and rushed outside. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a pale light across the farm. I spotted Emma near the edge of the field, crouched next to Charlie. A wave of dread washed over me as I approached. There lay Charlie, lifeless and caked in mud, his front paws badly bruised and the flesh peeled back, exposing the jutting bones. It was clear he had been digging with a frantic desperation and eventually died from the sheer exhaustion. Next to him was a mound of sand, the grave where Sir Sunrise had been buried. Emma looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know what happened, Dad. I found him like this." The horror of the scene settled over me, a chilling weight in my chest. Clara soon joined us, and we decided to bury Charlie with Sir Sunrise since they were pals after all. Once everybody went back inside, I ventured into the field, holding a shovel in my hand, wondering what else I might uncover. As I walked through the field, I noticed small mounds of earth scattered around, like hastily made burial sites. It was all too clear now what Charlie had been doing throughout the night. With a shovel, I dug into one of the mounds and uncovered a dead pigeon. Another revealed a large rodent. The field was littered with these makeshift graves, and I couldn't even guess how many there were. When I turned, my stomach clenched. Luke was standing there, his face pale, eyes wide with fear. "What's going on, Dad?" he asked, his voice trembling with confusion as he looked around. I forced a smile, kneeling down and placing my hands gently on his shoulders. "Nothing to worry about, buddy," I said, keeping my tone calm. "Charlie was just being Charlie. We'll take care of it." For the next 15 minutes, I tried to reassure him, telling him he had to be strong, that growing up meant taking responsibility and knowing when to keep things to himself. "You're a man now," I said, "and sometimes we do what we have to protect the family. Don't mention this to Clara or Emma, okay? They're already worried enough." Luke nodded, but the unease in his eyes was hard to miss. I hated myself for what I was doing. Gaslighting, My own son. But with the harvest only a couple of weeks away, I had no choice. The farm had to come first. As Luke slowly made his way back to the house, I glanced toward Mr. Monroe's property in the distance, and then back at the scarecrow. I felt a lump form in my throat. "That's strike two, Patrick," I muttered to myself. I knew I couldn't handle another incident like this. If anything else happened, I'd have to start thinking seriously about other contingencies. Time was running out. Determined to put my fears to rest, I decided to keep watch over the field myself, alone, in the dead of night. So the rest of the morning, I tended to the field, watering the crops and going about my usual farming routine, and when evening finally arrived, we all ate our meal in silence. One by one, everyone retreated to their rooms while I remained vigilant. Once everyone was in bed, I grabbed my shotgun and crept up to the second floor, where I had a clear view of the entire field. I had already set up lights at the corners so that I had sufficient visibility. I positioned myself at the window, determined to stay awake through the night. Hours ticked by slowly. The only sounds were the faint whisper of the wind and the occasional creak of the old farmhouse settling around me. My eyes eventually grew heavy, even as my body fought the exhaustion at every level. But I must have drifted off at some point, because when I opened my eyes again, I was startled by how still everything seemed. I instinctively glanced out the window, expecting to see the familiar silhouette of the scarecrow standing in its usual spot, but it wasn't there. My heart leapt in my throat as I scanned the field, and then I saw it, moving. The scarecrow was moving, not walking, not stumbling, but drifting. It glided across the ground as if something unseen was pulling it, dragging it toward the far end of the field. Then it suddenly stopped, and to my horror, I saw the birds descend quietly around it. My hands trembled as I bolted out of the chair, shotgun in one hand and the old lantern in the other. I didn't wake Clara or the kids. I didn't want to frighten them. But my pulse pounded in my ears as I sprinted into the field, the lantern swinging wildly in my arm. The scarecrow, now a distant silhouette, was still drifting, disappearing into the dark edges of the field. I sprinted after it, the lantern's glow swinging wildly in the darkness. When I reached the spot, I nearly dropped it. Dead animals lay scattered everywhere. Birds, mice, frogs, and even a rabbit, arranged in eerie, precise circles. The smell of decay clinging to the air. Out of the corner of my eye, I then spotted it again. The scarecrow, this time drifting slowly toward the opposite end. I ran toward it again, gripping my shotgun tightly as the lantern swayed in my hand and the wind howled around me. But as I approached the scarecrow, I froze. It wasn't the scarecrow that terrified me. It was Emma, my 12-year-old daughter, carrying the scarecrow as if it weighed nothing. The pole rested effortlessly on her small shoulder, her hands gripping it firmly, yet without emotion. Her movements were slow and mechanical, her eyes wide and blank, as if she were trapped in a trance. Behind her, Luke knelt in the dirt, his small hands stained with blood. He was carefully arranging a sparrow's body among the others, his face blank, his eyes unblinking. With a firm grip, he squeezed another rat's neck until it went limp, then placed it on the ground, completing a circle of dead animals. A wave of dread rose in my chest as I choked out a call, my voice thick with fear. "Emma, Luke, what are doing?" They didn't respond. They didn't even flinch. Emma kept walking, gripping the pole attached to the scarecrow and moving forward. Luke silently followed behind her. Then Emma suddenly stopped. She raised the scarecrow and pointed it westward, and from the shadows, animals suddenly emerged. Birds swooped down from the trees, rodents scurried out of the soil, and insects crawled from every crevice, all of them moving toward the scarecrow with eerie obedience. I could only watch in horror as Luke picked up a rock and began smashing the animals one by one. Each brutal strike was met with a sickening thud, and yet none of the creatures moved. They remained rooted to their spots, oblivious to the carnage unfolding around them. The air felt thick with something sinister, something beyond my understanding. My chest tightened as I staggered back, gasping for air. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. Then Luke bent down, grabbed a dead rodent from the ground, and sank his teeth into it. He bit into the fur with the desperation of a ravenous animal, blood smearing his lips as he chewed, completely lost in the frenzy. A wave of nausea washed over me as I realized how the scarecrow was controlling my children, transforming them into something unnatural, something monstrous. A torrent of anger erupted inside me, every cell in my body pulsing with raw fury. My hands shook, but my mind was suddenly clear. I knew exactly what I had to do. I dropped my lantern and rushed toward Emma, yanking the scarecrow from her hands and then hurling it to the ground. My kids remained mute spectators, rooted to their spots as they continued to be trapped in their hypnotic trance. I grabbed the lantern and smashed it against the scarecrow with all my might. It shattered on impact, igniting the scarecrow in flames. Without hesitation, I fired my shotgun at the fuel-soaked straw, and an explosion erupted, engulfing the figure in a fiery blaze. Emma blinked for the first time, as if suddenly waking from a dream, confused about how she had ended up in the middle of the field. My son Luke stared down at his blood-stained hands, clutching the dead rat. Horror washed over his face, his lip trembling as he met my eyes. "I didn't mean to, Daddy. I didn't mean to," he sobbed, wiping the blood from his mouth with the back of his hand. I dropped to my knees, pulling both of them into my arms as the fire crackled and roared, the acrid smell of burning straw filling the air. Through the flames, I watched a shadowy figure emerge, its silhouette shaped like a man, writhing and twisting, struggling to break free. For a fleeting moment, it seemed almost alive, thrashing in a desperate attempt to escape the flames. But the fires consumed him, pulling him deeper into the inferno until, at last, he vanished. I closed my eyes briefly, using the moment to utter a silent prayer to the Lord, hugging my children tighter, grateful that it was finally behind us. Together, we slowly walked back to the house, each step laden with the weight of what had just transpired. Just as we were about to enter the house, Clara opened the door, worry etched across her face. She had woken up sensing something was wrong, and when she found us missing, fear gripped her. As we stepped inside, she wrapped us in a warm embrace. I immediately felt a sense of relief, hoping that this whole nightmare was finally behind us, over. The next few weeks, my crops flourished, yielding a harvest that far exceeded my expectations. We were pulled back from the brink of financial ruin, but it came at a cost. Both Emma and Luke suffered from relentless nightmares, waking up screaming in the night, and it would be months before they could fully recover. I, too, struggled with sleep, waking in the dead of night drenched in sweat, haunted by the memory of the scarecrow. "It's gone," I kept telling myself. "The scarecrow is gone," and every night I prayed that it would stay that way.